The story begins with the image of a young man in a state of instability, clutching his head in frustration, his reflection appearing in a shard of broken mirror. He knows that name well, a name that cannot be controlled. He is a swordsman trapped in his own room, Fergus's eyes glinting red. That person is none other than the useless eldest son of Count Perdium. His name is Ghislaine Perdium. At this very moment, a man is trembling and gasping for breath, blood covering his face and his body riddled with wounds. He asks himself, "Are you telling me that a knight as skilled as I, the best in the north, was defeated by that worthless man?" At the same time, a hooded figure approaches, glancing at the knight and remarking, "Warm and pleasant, isn't it? I spent quite a lot of money on that trap." He carries a massive axe on his shoulder. Behind him a blazing fire roars, radiating scorching heat. Then he coldly asks, "Do you like this?" The northern knight grits his teeth, his eyes like bullets glaring ahead as he shouts furiously, "You are that worthless man, Ghislaine, a trap. Are you saying you knew my plan from the beginning?" He steps forward coldly and replies, "Not just that." The image of a group of people dressed in black with weapons and shields fully equipped appears. Along with that comes an affirmation, "I also knew how many of you there were, who the spy was, and who helped you bring reinforcements. I knew it all, like the image of a matryoshka doll, the small one hidden within the larger ones." Everything, even the old knight, was within his sight and grasp. Ghislaine affirmed, "I knew it from the start." The man bows his head in confusion. "Impossible. I always hid my strongest card." He continues to scream in rage, his eyes wide with disbelief at what he just heard. "How could you? How could a useless man like you dare?" Before the knight can finish his sentence, Ghislaine directly kicks him in the face, blood splattering along with a cry of pain. He looks down at the man lying on his back and shouts, "Shut up." Ghislaine threw his iron helmet to the ground, his voice full of defiance. "Go ahead and invade as many times as you want. Either way, next time I will be the one who wins, and the time after that, and the time after that, the result will not change." Behind that helmet stood a handsome blonde man. Ghislaine smiled and continued speaking to him. "Do you know why? Because I have already grasped every plan." The scene shifts to 1 year earlier, in the kingdom of Luthania, near the Perdium estate. A young man wakes up in a state of panic, his hands trembling, his breathing rapid as he asks himself, "What happened?" This man is none other than Ghislaine. He touches his neck, his face full of worry as he thinks, "Am I still alive?" Ghislaine's eyes widen in shock, his face pale as his mind fills with questions. "No way, just a moment ago I had." Images from the past flash back, his blood-stained sword flying through the air before plunging into the ground. In the distance, a bloody battle rages between two swordsmen. One of them is Ghislaine. He has been severely wounded, his head hanging low as he curses, "Damn it." Then he tilts his head back and screams in pain, a long slash across his chest where the sword cut through, blood spraying endlessly. The other swordsman steps forward, looking down at him kneeling there, smiling as he speaks mockingly. "So this is how it ends, Ghislaine Perdium, king of mercenaries and one of the 7 strongest on the continent." He too is one of the 7 strongest on the continent, the noble knight Idan. He stands there and declares, "So the war has ended." Idan points his sword at him and asks, "Any last words?" Ghislaine remains kneeling and replies, "No, only regret that I could not take my revenge." He looks up with eyes full of fury and spits out, "Go to hell, bastard." Idan looks down, frowning slightly, exhaling a breath as he sneers, "What an arrogant man." Standing there, Idan continues, "I never expected you to be the eldest son of the fallen Perdium family. You left your house after your sister's death, didn't you?" After a brief silence, Ghislaine looks up and asks in confusion, "How do you know that, when you are from another kingdom?" He answers calmly, "Of course I know. Long ago I exhausted myself tracing your trail." Idan laughs coldly and adds, "Because it was us. We were the ones who cooperated with the Delphine family to destroy yours." Ghislaine froze, his eyes wide open. The 2 words we kept appearing in his mind. He collapsed as he realized and wondered, are there others behind this besides the Delphine family? Idan stepped behind Ghislaine. placed his sharp sword on his shoulder and taunted. Then there is nothing more to explain. Anyway, you are about to die. You had better accept your fate. Ghislaine shouted curses. You bastard, I will never forget you. He narrowed his eyes and answered briefly. Very well. With that a sweetly sharp slash was delivered. Ghislaine's head was severed from his neck. Hot blood poured out tragically. Idun stood there with the coldness of an assassin. Back in the present, Ghislaine looked at himself in a tub of water, his hand still pressing his neck with an astonished look, wondering. In a moment he had cut off my head right then. Yet now I am still intact. Questions rose in his mind. Is this a dream? I myself am younger than before. Ghislaine glanced around. There was not a soul. He wondered, could I have been captured and used as an experiment for wizards or something similar? Those bastards. I will make them regret leaving me alive. Suddenly a voice from outside called in, making him startle. The person called him young master. The one who entered the tent was Ricardo. He was a soldier of the Perdium house. Please come outside, young master. I know you are awake. With customary caution, Ghislaine brought a knife to his throat and signaled silence. He carefully whispered into Ricardo's ear. I will let you live if you answer my questions. Ghislaine's eyes flashed coldly. His voice lowered threateningly. Or maybe not. Ricardo, sweatingly fearful, stammered the two words. Young master. He tried to ask back. Do you not think this is crossing the line? No means no. Ghislaine felt a bit puzzled inside. What is his reaction like when clearly he is being threatened? Then he asked aloud. Ricardo immediately pushed him away and replied with a frown. Earlier you were exhausted after your fit of rage and fell asleep right away. This made Ghislaine startle and wonder. What did I do? Ricardo raised his hand to his neck, looked back at him and asked in return. Have you forgotten everything after waking up? Just now you were furious and insisted on leading the squad yourself to sweep out the orcs. Ghislaine froze in place and exclaimed, the orcs. He still could not believe what he had just heard. What? I went mad. What nonsense is that? Ricardo paid little attention. He grabbed his gear and reminded. You should get ready. Everyone is waiting. Ghislaine still could not grasp the situation and continued asking. My gear? Are we going somewhere? Ricardo slung the travel bag over his shoulder, walked past him and answered. Where else? Of course to the Perdium estate. Ghislaine stopped short, his eyes glancing back with a huge question mark in his head. Then he turned and grabbed Ricardo by the shoulder, demanding. Say that again. Ghislaine's face suddenly grew loud again. Perdium? You mean the ruins of the Perdium estate? He stepped outside, stood on a rocky hill and looked into the distance, where the grand castle of the Perdium family stood tall, surrounded by homes and manors of the townsfolk. Everything was intact. Ghislaine felt puzzled inside. It truly is the Perdium estate, but why is it still standing? I saw it burn to ashes with my own eyes. Ricardo leaned in and whispered in his ear. Have you been tormented by nightmares? Who would call their own family fallen? You will be thrown out if the Count hears that. Ghislaine still could not believe what he was seeing. He pinched his cheek and wondered, am I dreaming? But after feeling the pain he realized, perhaps it was not a dream. Fragments of reality pieced together in Ghislaine's mind. First his face was younger. Next the territory and estate remained whole and magnificent. The image of Ghislaine standing amid the flow of time appeared. He realized that it meant he had regressed. When he was young, he held some resentment toward his family. Weakness born from insecurity brought him many troubles, and as time went on, more and more members of the family avoided Ghislaine. Unable to bear those criticisms, he decided to leave home. A few years later, Ghislaine became a mercenary, surviving countless battles, honing his skills, and beginning to build a reputation. He had returned to the Perdium district to atone for the mistakes of his past. But by then, the family and the entire territory had been reduced to ashes. Ghislaine had lost everything. The flag of Perdium was nothing more than a tattered rag. But now everything was still here, intact, and so was he, a young master gazing at the banner of his family. Ghislaine looked up, his face showing a hint of relief and happiness. Everyone he cherished was here. Then he covered his mouth and chuckled to himself. I still can't believe this is real. I really want to sing my favorite song. Right after that, his expression stiffened as he told himself. But now is not the time to celebrate. Ghislaine looked over at Ricardo and remembered. He said we are here to attack the orcs, right? I can never forget this day. Today is the day when most of the members of the raiding party will die. In his previous life, he had joined the orc raid in an attempt to build a name for himself. The report at that time said there were only 3 orcs. Ghislaine thought that was manageable for someone inexperienced like him. But when they arrived, more than 20 orcs were waiting. Almost the entire raiding team perished because of his stubbornness and desire to command. Now Ghislaine was tying up his arm and walking alongside Ricardo. Everything that happened could be changed, because those orcs actually had no tactics. The real question now was whether the others would trust him, since in their eyes he was just a useless man. Just as he was thinking, a watchtower shattered by something came flying toward them. It crashed right in front of Ghislaine with a loud thud, making him freeze instantly. The soldiers screamed in terror, "It's the orcs." They shouted warnings, "The orcs are here." And as soon as the words left their mouths, the 2 sides clashed. One side a horde of massive monsters wielding enormous axes and hammers. The other the Perdium family soldiers holding spears. Ghislaine was shocked and exclaimed, "Really, they arrived this quickly in my previous life." In the raging battle, the orcs attacked madly, their superior physical strength giving them the advantage. Soldiers were cut down and wounded, crying out in pain, blood everywhere. At that moment, the voice of the commander roared. From ranks, a man in blue armor rushed forward shouting orders. "Do not panic, form up." That man was Skovan, the commander of the raid. As soon as he arrived, he immediately clashed with a ferocious orc that tossed soldiers aside and blocked Skovan's advance. The commander frowned and cursed under his breath. "Damn it, we let our guard down, ambushed without any preparation, and their numbers are greater than reported. At this rate we will all die." Suddenly, a loud shout came from behind, startling him. "Commander." The voice warned him, "Behind you." At that moment, a savage orc with a massive axe was about to strike down. Then a hand grabbed Skovan's shoulder before his astonished eyes. Ghislaine threw him behind himself and charged straight at the orc's axe. The sudden action completely stunned Skovan. He frowned and turned to look, staring intently while muttering, "The young master." Meanwhile, the orc's axe was already descending toward Ghislaine's head, but his sword was raised, ready to strike back. The blade pierced straight through the orc's wrist, blood splattering. Immediately after, Ghislaine spun his body and twisted his sword, severing the orc's arm that held the axe, causing it immense pain. With just that single move, he managed to shock both the commander and the soldiers, leaving them completely astonished. The orc looked down at its bleeding arm and roared in agony, then collapsed backward, its massive body shattering the ground, while Ghislaine stood watching. He began to sheath his sword, muttering to himself, "Damn it, looks like I can't use mana. I wish I had come back to the past a bit earlier." Then Ghislaine turned toward Skovan and asked, "You are the commander, right?" The man stammered slightly. "Young master." Ghislaine extended his hand. Seeing that he did not respond, Ghislaine repeated his request, "Give me command authority." Skovan, sweating profusely, squinted and thought to himself, "What? Command authority? I know you are a fool, but asking for command authority when the soldiers' lives are in danger." He stood up, turned away, and refused flatly, "I cannot." Ghislaine was startled and questioned, "What did you say?" Skovan kept walking and added, "Do you think this is a game? Even if you are the young master, I cannot easily give up the authority entrusted to me by the Lord." Ghislaine frowned and thought, "How troublesome. But I would react the same way if an idiot came asking for command authority." The previous problem was not yet solved when a new one appeared. Another orc was charging toward the 2 of them. Skovan immediately rushed forward, blocking in front of Ghislaine, and shouted loudly, "Retreat now. I will handle everything here. You are still too inexperienced to lead an army." Ghislaine raised his sword, his sharp gaze fixed ahead as he replied, "Looks like I have no other choice." He threw his sword, letting it pass right by the commander, forcing him to dodge sideways in shock. Skovan grabbed Ghislaine by the collar and shouted in his face, "What do you think you are doing?" But the sound from behind made him freeze. Then he turned around, eyes wide in surprise. In front of Skoven was the sight of Ghislaine's sword impaled right in the orc's forehead, and the creature stood motionless. Then the orc collapsed to the ground with a thud, its throat trying to let out painful cries, eyes rolled back, and blood flowed endlessly. Skoven was utterly stunned, mixed with fear, thinking, "What is this? How did he strike such a fatal point?" Ghislaine looked over and asked, "Skoven, right, do you know what the most important thing in battle is?" The man stood there without an answer. Meanwhile, in the center of the battlefield, the orcs were terrifying the soldiers, who trembled in fear at the savagery of the red-skinned monsters. At that moment, Ghislaine spoke again with conviction. "There is no hope of victory when our soldiers are filled with fear. We must give them motivation." With those words, Ghislaine, without hesitation, rushed toward the orc, quickly pulled the sword from its head, and joined the battle. All those actions happened in an instant, leaving Skoven completely stunned. He took a step back, leaped high into the air, and raised his sword, ready to strike down. A second later, Ghislaine drove his blade straight into the head of an orc in the group, dropping it to the ground before the astonished eyes of all the soldiers. Even the commander, looking over, was shaken in fear. This was the third one he had slain. Ghislaine slowly pulled his sword out, the blade dripping with orc blood, and spoke a taunting challenge. "Come at me, you orcs." He stepped on the head of the fallen creature and shouted, "I..." Then, with just one man and one sword, he fearlessly charged into the horde of orcs. He darted and weaved like a slippery fish, slashing through the air before severing the arm of another orc. The commander stared at the falling monster limbs before him and muttered in disbelief, "Am I dreaming?" Watching the young man fight, Skoven silently assessed, "Even as a mana user, I would struggle to do anything. Yet that frail young master can pull off all of this." He looked at Ghislaine and observed, "I can see he's exhausting himself, but he's using the smallest movements to dodge and taking advantage of his swordsmanship to strike their weak points. It's like watching a swordsman with no mana, an image of one of the 7 strongest on the continent from the previous era." Skoven was still in awe, or perhaps it was something even greater. Ghislaine shouted, "Is that all you've got? I haven't even warmed up yet." He ran while mocking them. "You don't deserve to be called a warrior race at all." On the other side, Ricardo cried out, "They're all charging at the young master," while a soldier beside him asked, "Is he running away?" They turned towards Skoven and called, "Commander." Meanwhile, he was staring blankly, questioning, what the hell is he thinking? Charging into the orcs to draw their attention was fine, but running away now seemed odd. And what's worse, that direction leads straight to the cliff. Skoven froze for a moment and realized, wait, the cliff. His mouth dropped open, sweat streaming down his face as he muttered unconsciously, "Don't tell me." Immediately after, the commander turned and shouted, "Soldiers, raise the shield wall." Skoven lowered his voice as if confirming a decision, "We will follow the young master." On the other side, the orcs had been completely lured in, relentlessly chasing after Ghislaine, who was now running with all his strength. As he ran, he thought to himself, "Skoven, if you're a good commander, you should have already realized my plan." Although he wanted to take them all down himself, his miserable stamina wouldn't allow it. But Ghislaine had succeeded in leading them right to the cliff's edge. He smiled faintly and muttered, "Still, this much should be enough for you to handle." At that moment, heavy thudding footsteps echoed from behind the orcs. The monsters turned around, their faces filled with confusion. On this side, a wall of shields had been raised, with sharp spears pointing forward. Though exhausted, Ghislaine smiled in satisfaction and muttered, "Perfectly." Without a moment's hesitation, he kicked off the cliff's edge, using the momentum to hurl himself into the abyss. Even while suspended in midair, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Right now." Above him, Commander Skoven roared, "Soldiers." He gave a direct order, pushed them into the abyss, and the formation immediately tightened. As soon as the words left his mouth, the shield wall closed in, and the soldiers, they shouted with determination as they forced them back. One after another the orcs fell, plummeting freely into the depths below. The brute beasts, strong but foolish, were defeated in a way no one could have expected. The soldiers looked at each other and finally let out a sigh of relief. We did it. All the orcs have been wiped out. Only then did the commander remember there was still someone below. He quickly looked down and called out, "Young master." Ghislaine had driven his sword into the cliffside, gripping it tightly to keep himself from falling like the orcs. When he saw Skoven, he looked up and smiled faintly in relief, which momentarily startled the commander. Skoven reached down and said, "Here, take my hand." But Ghislaine's hand holding the sword hilt was already slipping. He stayed silent for a moment before weakly replying, "I can't." Despite the shouts of encouragement from above telling him to hold on, Ghislaine let go and fell into the abyss. The commander and soldiers were stunned by what they saw, only able to cry out together, "Young master." Some time later, a little girl in pink appeared, her lips pursed as she repeatedly called, "Ghislaine Appa." He slowly opened his eyes, froze upon seeing her, and softly whispered, "Elena, is that you?" In the fragments of his memory, he saw Elena trembling and crying when their mother left. Her innocent smile as she thanked him for helping her with something. The times she shouted angrily, "What's wrong with you lately?" And even her words of reproach, "You're awful." Ghislaine stood there, staring at the fragment in his hand and said, "These are my memories of Elena." At that moment, the little girl's hand grabbed his arm tightly as she called out, "Appa, let's go together." Right then, Ghislaine jolted awake. He was lying there with a wet towel on his forehead, resting on a bed inside a small room. Looking down at his palm, he thought, "I'm still alive. It seems they managed to save me." Ghislaine sat up, removed the towel, and held his head as he muttered, "Was that all just a dream?" Immediately after, he began to feel pain spreading across his entire body. Ghislaine groaned, "My whole body aches, probably the consequence of pushing myself beyond my limits. But at least that pain reminds me I'm still alive." Just then, someone entered the room and called out, "Young master." The maid, holding a basin of water, looked both excited and relieved to see him awake. "Young master, you're finally conscious." Ghislaine blinked in surprise and asked, "Belinda, is that you?" She placed the basin on the table, exhaled deeply, and scolded. "Do you know how worried I was? Didn't I tell you already? You should have let the soldiers handle the orcs." Ignoring her words, he suddenly moved forward and wrapped his arms around her. Startled, Belinda asked, "What are you doing? Did I do something wrong?" To which Ghislaine replied, "No, I'm just happy to see you." His tutor, Belinda, had been by his side since he was a child, the only person who stayed with him despite all his foolishness. But after the fall of the family and her disappearance, he never saw her again. He had never imagined he would get the chance to see her like this. Belinda then asked, "What makes you so happy when we see each other every day, young master?" Ghislaine frowned, deep in thought. "I need to tell Belinda the truth." He then placed his hand on her shoulder, his tone serious. "Listen to me carefully. A disaster is about to strike Perdium." Belinda's eyes widened as she asked in shock, "What are you talking about?" Ghislaine spoke slowly, his voice trembling slightly. "The truth is, I died." He looked at her with sincere eyes and continued, "And I've come back to this life." Belinda gave an awkward laugh and replied, "Sure, I'm sure those orcs nearly killed you." Ghislaine tried to explain, That's not what I meant." But as she adjusted the pillow and blanket, she said, "Do you realize that it's you, not Perdium, who's in greater danger right now?" He stood there silently, listening to his tutor scold him without daring to argue, only thinking to himself, "She doesn't believe me. Maybe saying this won't help at all." After venting her frustration, Belinda asked, seriously, "What will you do if you're too injured to attend the festival?" Ghislaine widened his eyes in surprise and asked, "Festival? What festival?" She quickly replied, "Have you really forgotten? Lady Elena has been waiting for this day so she could go to the festival with you." With the photo of the two siblings sitting on the table, Belinda continued, "This will be a wonderful opportunity for the two of you to grow closer again." There was indeed always a festival held around this time every year. Ghislaine picked up the photo, looked at it, and said, "That's right." In his previous life, He never had the time to enjoy the festival because of all the pain and suffering he had gone through. Ghislaine then asked, "How long until the festival?" Belinda thought for a moment and replied, "Let me see. Since it's happening next week, you have about a week left." He repeated her words, "Only a week. That's the day that changed my life." Just then, someone else opened the door and called out, "Appa, are you in there?" The memories that had haunted his mind resurfaced, and now Ghislaine turned his eyes toward the door. The image of Elena in his dream, calling him to come with her, flashed once more. He looked at the moment he saw his little sister, Ghislaine ran out and hugged her tightly. This took Belinda by surprise as she looked on with astonishment. Elena blushed and exclaimed, "What's wrong with you? What kind of joke is this?" He smiled softly and whispered into her ear, "I missed you, my little sister." Elena immediately pushed Ghislaine away. "Let go of me. You're making my skin crawl." He held his chest, coughing several times, then thought to himself, "This strength is incredible for a child. Has she always been this strong?" The girl brushed off her clothes and looked at him with a tired expression. "Belinda told me to come here. What are you doing? Do you really think this will make everything better?" Ghislaine asked in confusion. "What? Make what better?" Elena recalled the time her brother had scolded her. Back then he had shouted in her face, "I told you to get lost because you're too annoying. Just feeling your breath disgusts me." Then she turned back to him and said, "Have you forgotten, after saying all that?" Ghislaine responded blankly, "Did I really say that?" He patted her head and apologized, thinking to himself, "In my previous life, I wasn't close to Elena at all. I was a complete bastard." Belinda was surprised and exclaimed, "He apologized first," while the little girl asked in disbelief, "I heard an orc took you down. Did you hit your head or something?" Their words and expressions left him completely speechless. Then Ghislaine tried to explain, "No, I really did kill all of them. Why do you keep implying I was the one beaten?" Suddenly the pain struck again. He clutched his chest as sparks of electricity flashed. Seeing her brother kneeling there, Elena rubbed her chin and sighed sarcastically. "Right. I'm sure you destroyed them all in that condition. You came back unconscious." After that, the two girls just stood there laughing in amusement. Ghislaine smiled happily and thought, "Everyone is just as I remember, and yet my past self wasted so much time on useless things." During the festival that would take place the following week, he had refused Elena's invitation to go together, using the excuse that the raid incidents made him uncomfortable, and that was the last time he saw her. Later, Elena's body was found torn apart along with her guards. Remembering that made his chest tighten, his whole body trembling with guilt. "I should have been there with her." At that moment, someone knocked on the door, followed by a voice, "May we come in?" Standing outside were the two guards, Jamal and Philip, smiling as they said, "There you are, Lady Elena." The girl stepped out and asked, "What's going on?" "I told you to wait outside." Jamal hurriedly explained, "Apologies. The servants requested that you oversee the preparation of the festival supplies." Ghislaine wondered, why are they asking Elena to do this? Belinda, slightly annoyed, explained, "You wouldn't know, my lord, because you spend your days idling around. I can't understand how Peridium is so short on manpower that even the young lady has to work." Elena waved goodbye before leaving. "I'm off now. Take care of yourself, okay?" He watched her go, thinking, are we really that short on workers? I never cared about these things before, so of course I wouldn't know. Ghislaine stood there with his hands in his pockets and called out, "Let me lend a hand then." The girl turned back with an innocent look after hearing those words. Once again, they were both astonished. Belinda was surprised. He volunteered to help, while Elena was doubtful, did he really get hit on the head? The scene shifted to outside the mansion, where many stalls had been set up and nearly all the household staff had gathered there. They were startled by the loud voices of the young master and his sister. While Ghislaine wanted to help, Elena flatly refused. "Go away. Everyone will be too scared to work with you around." He looked puzzled and said that how you treat someone who wants to help. She immediately retorted, "The best way you can help us is by staying out of the way and not causing trouble." Ghislaine looked aside, thinking. Elena's body was found near the slums, far from the festival. Someone must have lured her there or forced her to go. To prevent that from happening, he needed to understand every corner of the mansion first. Just then, a man in armor approached and called loudly, "Lord Ghislaine." He glanced over and murmured, "That face?" An old man stood there, panting heavily and wiping sweat from his forehead. Ghislaine spoke up, "Old man Fergus, you're still alive." The man replied, "Still alive, thank the heavens." Then he hurried over, placed a hand on Ghislaine's shoulder, and said, "This humble servant, Fergus, came to see you the moment I heard about the orcs." Ghislaine brushed it off impatiently. "I don't want to talk about that anymore." Elena chuckled and said cheerfully, "You came just in time. He's been acting strange ever since he woke up. Please take him back to his room." Fergus happily complied, while Ghislaine silently blamed himself. His troublesome image from the past was now getting in the way. He held his head and muttered to himself, "It can't be helped. I'll have to figure out what's going on in this mansion over the next week." Then Ghislaine turned and asked, "There's a training ground in the castle that's been abandoned, right? Take me there." Fergus replied, "I'm sorry, my lord, the training ground?" "Whatever for?" Ghislaine answered indifferently, "To train." The answer caught the old man off guard, but he soon responded, "This way, my lord." The scene shifted to the training yard. Ghislaine stood there, speechless at the sight before him. He murmured in awe, "Unbelievable, it's in better condition than I expected." He stepped down, glanced around at the weapons, and thought to himself, "This is the perfect place for me to train. I've never seen anything like this even when I was a mercenary." Fergus spoke up, "We've been maintaining it just in case you ever wanted to use these facilities." His face turned serious as he said in a low tone, "I'm certain what you're going through is only a passing phase." Ghislaine recalled and thought, "In my previous life, he lowered his head sadly, "So that's how it happened." He patted the old man's shoulder and said, "I need to live a long life, old man. Dying is a truly awful feeling." Fergus, puzzled, replied, "Forgive me, but you speak as if you've experienced death yourself." Ghislaine smiled, as expected. Ghislaine stepped into the yard and looked back. "Anyway, you can go now. I'll start my training." Fergus bowed and replied, "I'll be waiting outside." Ghislaine watched his retreating figure and thought, "It seems I've always treated those around me like enemies. And now, having returned and seen their smiles again, I realize I was nothing but a narrow-minded fool in the past." Standing there, he muttered to himself, "1 week. That's all the time left before the tragedy happens." Back then, the one revealed to be behind Elena's death was a lord from a neighboring territory. Because of that, Perdium was dragged into a war, leading to the downfall of the family. He closed his eyes. Elena's death was essentially the beginning of our family's destruction. Then he opened them again, eyes sharp with determination, which means I must set everything right from here. Sitting down in the center of the training ground, Ghislaine thought, "First, I need to get my body in shape. Too bad there isn't much time. But at least he should be able to control mana." Ghislaine was regulating his breathing. Mana is a supernatural resource that helps humans surpass their limits. Right now around him were floating mana particles that could not be seen with the naked eye. Most people said that perceiving and absorbing mana was the hardest part, but Ghislaine could already do that even on a chaotic battlefield. First, he had to connect the floating mana particles in the air and gather them as if spinning thread. For someone like Ghislaine, who had gone through thousands or even tens of thousands of battles in his previous life, creating a mana core was like a child's play. He breathed and frowned, thinking, "But if it were only like that, I could not have become one of the 7 strongest on the continent." Thanks to the method from the half-burned magic book that Ghislaine once found, and with a natural mana core inside the human body, he could create a second core, even a third one, forming a network of linked cores to produce explosive power. After overtraining, Ghislaine vomited blood, groaning in pain. He bent down and muttered, 3 is my current limit, even though in my previous life I reached 5 cores. This method allows the creation of great power in a short time. but at the same time consumes a massive amount of mana, which makes Ghislaine keep bleeding. This was the reason he failed against Idun in his previous life. He led an entire group of knights to attack when Ghislaine had already exhausted his mana. If it had been a fair fight, he would definitely have won. Ghislaine raised his hand to wipe his mouth and muttered, "This is an unstable technique, but for now it is enough. I am young and have plenty of time." He stood up and confidently declared, "This time I will take your head, Idun, and all the bastards hiding behind House Delphine." Ghislaine's eyes were filled with resentment. "Those who contributed to the destruction of my territory, I will destroy them all." The scene changed to 1 week later, on the day of the festival. Ghislaine was adjusting his outfit. The belt was tightened. The sword was hanging at his waist. Everything was ready. He walked through the territory just like he had done in the past. The looks everyone gave him were still the same. Elena was standing there waiting, her innocent face calm and expectant, silently looking toward her brother. As soon as she saw Ghislaine, the little girl asked curiously, "You really came? What happened? You never show up in places like this." He immediately replied, "Well, as a member of Perdium, I should attend the festival from time to time." Elena looked at him with puzzled eyes and asked, "You have been acting very strange lately. I heard you did nothing but train all week." Ghislaine rubbed his neck and asked, "Is it wrong for the successor of a knight family to train?" The girl replied in surprise, "You never cared about these things before." Elena added, "You are the one who once said that father is annoying and that you wished you were already the Lord." That sentence pierced through his head like a bullet. The girl smiled cheerfully. "Anyway, I like how things are going now." Elena gazed into the distance, her eyes filled with happiness. "It seems the old you has come back." Those words made him treasure the present even more. Ghislaine looked around. He had realized something during the past week, because his actions had changed. The way people viewed Ghislaine and the future was also gradually changing. On the other side, Belinda was instructing the guards, "You two handle it yourselves. If the young master causes trouble, we really cannot let anything happen, especially when there are so many guests visiting." They replied in unison, "Do not worry, you can trust us." The general flow of events might be the same, but it was hard to assess the impact of Ghislaine's actions on the small details. Using information from the future wisely was his task. Ghislaine needed to respond to each situation effectively. He placed his hand on the pouch at his waist and affirmed, "My preparations are complete." The two siblings began to enjoy the festival. They stopped by a pastry stall. Elena started bargaining. Then she grabbed her brother's hand and pulled him along. After a while, under the family castle, Elena was sitting and complaining. "It was fun, but things are getting a little boring because it is the same every year. Is there nothing new this time?" Ghislaine thought to himself, "The festival is almost over, but nothing has happened yet. Could it be because I am staying with Elena?" At that moment, a voice called out, "Would you like to check the other areas?" Judging from the outfit, the man who approached was one of the guards. He reached out his hand and said, "According to a friend of mine, there are new events elsewhere. What do you think?" The girl asked back, "Really?" Then, without any suspicion, Elena took his hand and followed him with a bright smile. This is better than repeating the same old event. Meanwhile, Ghislaine watched them from afar. His eyes turned. The night guards of Elena, Jamal and Philip, were the most trusted knights during the conflict, as they had protected Elena since she was a child. It was known that they were killed while defending her in Ghislaine's previous life. He looked sharply at them and assessed, "So it is you two, the traitors of the Perdium family." After a while, the two guards had led their young masters to an unknown place. Jamal spoke with excitement, "We have arrived." But strangely, in front of them was an empty courtyard, quiet and deserted, with only a few gentle breezes passing by. Elena looked around gloomily and asked in frustration, "What is this?" "There is nothing here. Are you sure there is supposed to be a performance in such a filthy place?" He scratched his head with an awkward smile and replied, "Maybe they are not ready yet." Jamal tried to explain, "I think everyone will arrive soon." The girl responded a bit angrily, "Do not joke with me like that. Who would want to perform in a place like this? Meanwhile, Ghislaine was silently observing everything. He quietly assessed everything was just as expected. At first glance, this might seem like a deserted street, but judging by the placement of the obstacles blocking the escape routes, they must have prepared beforehand. While lost in thought, Ghislaine was suddenly pulled away by his sister. "Come on, brother." Jamal called out from behind. "Milady, should we not stay to watch the performance, since we have already come here?" But Elena replied irritably, "There is no need. I have no intention of watching a performance in a place like this." Ghislaine, being dragged rather roughly, asked his sister, "Have you been training or something? How are you this strong?" That made the girl turn back and look at him in confusion. While she was distracted, Elena was stopped by the other guard. Philip stood there frowning with an unpleasant expression and said, "Milady, please wait a little longer." Elena looked up at him in puzzlement. She said, "You are all acting strange. What is wrong with you today?" Jamal approached, rubbing his neck and explaining, "Oh dear, I did not mean to scare you." He smiled dangerously, clapped his hands together, and continued, "It is just that a reasonable request has been made." Elena asked back, "A request?" Right at that moment, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed. A man wearing a cloak with a wide-brimmed hat appeared, followed by two others dressed in black cloaks. The man's name was Frank. He stood there and gave a compliment, just as expected. "Your work was very clean." Jamal turned around and replied, "Of course, we brought the young lady here as promised, so let us finish the deal now." Frank was startled when he noticed another person, not the eldest son of the Perdium family. "I don't recall asking for him to be brought here." Elena clung tightly to her brother, her body trembling with fear. Jamal replied. At that moment, Ghislaine finally spoke up. "Jamal, so you have betrayed us. Do you really think you can escape from this?" He exhaled lightly and smiled. "Why don't you worry about yourself first, young master? All we have to do after this is flee far away." He spoke openly with disdain. "We have grown sick of this poor land, tormented by savages." Jamal shrugged mockingly. "I'm quite sure there are others besides us who have abandoned Perdium, aren't there?" As soon as he finished speaking, Ghislaine flashed before him with his sword in hand, unleashing a sharp strike in the blink of an eye. Blood splattered across the long wound on Jamal's chest. His eyes widened as blood gushed from his mouth. The others were stunned. Frank remained composed but was still visibly startled. Jamal's body split in two and fell to the ground after the slash. As Ghislaine declared, "At least they never betrayed us." He turned around and asked Philip, "Don't you think so?" Philip quickly grabbed Elena, his other hand reaching for his sword as he shouted, "Jamal, that fool, how could a knight lose to an amateur like him?" Before he could finish, a sword flew toward him and pierced straight through his head. Before dying, his eyes bulged wide as he muttered only a few words, "Impossible." His body then collapsed heavily to the ground before the two Perdium siblings. One of the black-cloaked men behind Frank asked, "Are you sure that's the eldest son of Perdium?" While the other spoke curiously, "I thought he had no real combat experience or formal training." He replied, "Judging by his appearance, I am not mistaken." In Frank's mind, he thought, although they were ambushed unexpectedly, he immediately killed two knights, using only mana attacks. Elena trembled and looked up asking, "Brother, what was happening?" Ghislaine remained silent for a moment without answering. When the girl called him brother once more, he suddenly struck lightly at her neck. Elena fainted. Ghislaine slowly laid his sister down and softly said, "Rest a little." From behind, the voice of a stranger rang out, "Thanks for helping us handle things, eldest son of Perdium." They stepped forward and continued, "You are nothing like what I was told. We planned to deal with those two ourselves." Frank took out a pipe and asked, "Did you hide your true skills?" He gently drew his sword up and asked him back, "And does that matter to you?" Ghislaine glanced to the back and realized there were three people. He silently assessed, the two beside him are insignificant, but the one standing in the middle emits mana at a completely different level. Ghislaine began to gather mana and intended to finish this quickly. He stepped toward them and said, "Let me ask you one question. Who is behind ordering all of this? Frank replied coldly, well, is it necessary for someone about to die to know that? Ghislaine, as he had predicted the answer, barely murmured, I know you will not speak easily. It is fine. He slowly raised his mana-filled sword and declared, slowly you will want to confess too. The man behind spoke up asking, should we cut off his head? Frank answered, no, capture him, then break each of his limbs so that he cannot help but go mad. Frank laughed and continued, he must writhe in pain so that the form becomes perfect. The two companions immediately charged at Ghislaine and simultaneously said, yes, sir. He also quickly entered the combat stance and took out a small firework he had prepared and held it in his hand. Then he immediately threw it quickly toward the two men in black. One of them squinted and realized fireworks. Before he could react, a slash appeared. The firework was cut in half, and there was a wound in the center of his chest. A sudden and precise stab down to the centimeter. The remaining man saw his comrade fall and immediately charged forward shouting, what a shallow trick! But Ghislaine timely brought his sword behind him and blocked that slash. His eyes flashed as he glanced at him, then with his other arm he looped around and locked his sword. With another swing Ghislaine successfully seized the black-cloaked man's weapon. Then he immediately launched a slash that severed his head from his neck. Suddenly something struck down from behind, making him alert. Frank had launched a surprise sneak attack, but Ghislaine had also timely used the weapon he had just taken to block the blow. He looked at him startled, thinking, this guy blocked my attack in that stance, and it was a perfect ambush too. At the same time he quickly turned to the side preparing for a counterattack. Ghislaine unleashed a sharp upward slash toward him. The pipe was cut in half and blood appeared on Frank's neck. The pipe clattered to the ground. But at that moment a sword was suddenly descending before Ghislaine's puzzled eyes. Once again he timely raised his paired swords and blocked in time. Frank exhaled and smiled in admiration. I am truly surprised. If my mana were weaker, perhaps my head would have been cut off right now. Ghislaine trembled slightly from the force of that slash and wondered how he survived a strike to the neck. Had he concentrated mana around his neck to Frank gripped his sword tightly, simultaneously channeling a considerable amount of mana into it, and at the same time showed curiosity. I do not know where you learned such strange swordsmanship. He attacked while asserting, but you cannot defeat me with such weak mana. Frank laughed loudly with self-satisfaction and shouted, you will die here. In response, Ghislaine wore a mysterious smile. He showed no fear at those threats. Frank was slightly startled when he saw that smile. Ghislaine twisted his body back to avoid the strike. Meanwhile, planting his two swords into the ground so he would not fall, he borrowed momentum, swung his leg and delivered a kick straight to Frank's face. At that moment Frank was pushed back a long distance, but Frank still calmly smiled, exhaled and said, didn't I say? With that amount of mana it is ineffective. But suddenly his face contorted. The smile vanished. He tried to clamp his mouth shut. Then Frank collapsed to his knees, vomiting a mouthful of blood. He looked at his trembling palm and worriedly thought, what just happened? The power of that attack was different. There is no way he could have pierced my enhancement like that at this level. Ghislaine stepped closer and said, I never thought there was a real mastermind behind Elena's death. His whole body now radiated killing intent. Mana cores appeared in his body, coldly looking at him. So you are the culprit, Ghislaine coldly shouted. Get ready. Third core, release. Frank gritted his teeth and asked hoarsely, what? How did he increase his mana so much? Like a blink speed? In an instant he was in front of him with two swords in hand preparing to slash down. The fearful look of Frank appeared behind cracked lenses, thinking, he's too fast. Each strike from Ghislaine immediately pushed Frank back, forcing him to retreat, repeatedly struggling to defend. He brought his two swords back, eyes intensely focused. Then he launched an extremely powerful horizontal slash. The excess energy even caused destruction behind him. Frank's sword and arm trembled right after. He grimaced, thinking, impossible. My arm is gradually going numb just from blocking his attacks. His sword had reached its limit and begun to crack. Frank realized, No matter how much mana is drawn, it usually only has limited effect. He had never heard of any method that could cause mana to surge like this. The image of the swordsman Ghislaine from his previous life appeared. In Frank's eyes, he seemed to have become a completely different person. The decisive strike shattered the sword, Frank's terrified face appearing on the broken blade. A long cut appeared across his chest, similar to the way Ghislaine had finished Jamal. Not stopping there, he continued to press forward with a face full of fury. A full-force straight thrust was executed by Ghislaine. Frank screamed in pain, blood gushing from his throat. He quickly pinned him against the nearby wall, his hand clamping tightly on his neck so he was completely restrained. Ghislaine began the interrogation. Let us continue the previous conversation. The sword in his hand was still lodged in his stomach. He asked, "Who gave the order for this?" Frank did not answer. He produced a poisoned dart from his sleeve, thinking, "I will not fall easily." His gaze turned to the small Elena lying there, and he thought to himself, "At least I will take the young lady of Perdium with me." He prepared to launch the hidden weapon, but was immediately held by threads of mana. Ghislaine looked down at his hand and continued in a cold, threatening tone, "How about we try negotiating?" His eyes also flashed warning strands of mana. "Do not waste your efforts. Answer my question, and I will withdraw the sword." Frank looked down in astonishment. "These are threads formed from mana. I cannot move. When did he make them?" Meanwhile, the sword in Ghislaine's hand still remained in his abdomen. He was fairly certain a man of his caliber would know how to heal himself. Then Ghislaine immediately issued a warning. "Even so, that means nothing if I destroy your mana core." Hearing that, Frank cried out in horror. "What?" He began to feel mana escaping from his body. Frank looked down at the light beneath his stomach in fear and screamed in pain. He sensed his mana core shattering. Frank shouted, "Are you insane? Just one mistake, and the mana feedback could cause a destructive explosion across this entire area. Are you trying to self-destruct?" Ghislaine replied coldly, "That is the work of the weak, while I can control it." Frank gradually realized the severity of the situation, and that the man in front of him was not speaking in vain. He saw death reflected in the boy's eyes. He knew he would die if he failed to satisfy him. Frank hurriedly shouted his answer. It was Count Desmond. He was the one who gave the order. He said he needed an excuse to start a war against the Perdium and Degard families. Ghislaine frowned and replied, "Is that so?" Then thought to himself, so it was Desmond. In his previous life, secret dealings like this were usually handled by families allied with the Duke. "Duke Delphine, you dared to manipulate such nonsense without being exposed." He continued questioning, "So you wanted to kill Elena, didn't you?" Frank, panting in fear, answered, "Yes." As soon as the words left his mouth, Ghislaine drove his sword deeper into his stomach. Frank screamed, "What are you doing? This isn't what you said before." Ghislaine gave a cold smile and replied, "What's wrong? You've killed countless people in your life. Yet now you tremble when it's your turn?" Suddenly Frank laughed loudly, startling Ghislaine. Frank knocked his forehead against him and taunted, "Even if you kill me, nothing will change. I've already finished my work with the Degard family. Do you really think people will listen to—" Ghislaine coldly said as Frank trembled in fear. "Let me tell you something. I was reborn after I died," he declared confidently, "so this time will be different." Frank threw his head back and screamed, his entire body cracking apart. In the dark night of the festival, a surge of mana light rose into the sky, then exploded like fireworks. Below, there was another display, one of blood. The corpses of assassins and traitors lay scattered across the ground, accompanied by Ghislaine's heavy breathing. He turned his head slightly, his face exhausted and his body covered in blood. His gaze fell upon Elena, making sure she was still lying there, merely unconscious. The sword in Ghislaine's hand slipped and fell to the ground. He looked up at the sky, closed his eyes in relief, but his overburdened body would not obey. Something inside seemed about to burst forth. Ghislaine then collapsed to his knees and vomited blood. He wiped his mouth and groaned, "Damn it. Detonating 3 mana cores before was no problem when I was the king of mercenaries. I will not collapse like this. In a nearby house, a sound came from within. He quickly rushed inside and witnessed the ruined scene, with a person lying in a pool of blood. Ghislaine recalled, in my previous life another corpse was found beside Elena in this place. The image of a man standing before a family crest. He looked down at the corpse and assessed, according to what that man said. This one is likely the son of the Degard house. Ghislaine stepped forward to inspect the body and judged. It seems he was killed along with his guard knight, so they silenced them and staged the scene to make it look like they were Elena's killers. The moment this truth is exposed, a clan war will erupt. Ghislaine took a small firework from his side, intending to erase this evidence. He shouldered his sister and left behind the burning house. I will not let things go according to their plan. On a nearby large tree, a man in a black cloak silently watched Ghislaine's departing figure, then his silhouette faded away mysteriously. At a roundtable conference, a man knelt in the center and endured questioning. It was a failure. We sent knights to guard along with Frank, our best. Yet you could not handle a single girl. Did you neglect vigilance because you thought the mission was too easy? He knelt there, not daring to raise his head, stammering in reply. Yes, the man grimaced and, with fear, continued, it was all because of Ghislaine Perdium. A member slammed the table and asked incredulously, Ghislaine, that useless one from the north? He expressed doubt. I am sure you also know Ghislaine is just a useless man. Do you really use him as an excuse? The kneeling man answered. He was completely different from the information and rumors we had about him. The image of Ghislaine holding a sword with sharp eyes from the past flashed in his mind. The evasion twist to avoid a surprise strike, then a series of relentless attacks, pressure, and the decisive thrust into Frank. Then dealing with the house containing evidence of the Degard son and carrying the sister away from the scene. He affirmed, it was as if he were a completely different person. But we already resolved matters with Degard, so there will be no problem to start a territorial war. Please give me another chance. Those in power behind this all scolded him in unison. Shut up. You could not even gather enough information about a child. Do you realize how great an obstacle this caused? You could not complete a simple mission. Yet you ask for another chance. Eliminate him. In the middle of the room, a man sat in a chair under the halo of light streaming in from outside. He complained, too noisy, then directly asked the assassin, what kind of opportunity do you want? He declared, I will remove Ghislaine Perdium. The same old question echoed. How? He answered, I will create a natural one-on-one match, and I already have a name in mind. Everyone wondered who it was. The assassin replied, his name is Cain Loges. He is famous for swordsmanship based on strength. Though young, he is the embodiment of power. I can confidently say no one in the north can match his strength. The assassin added, moreover, Cain is Ghislaine's cousin, so I am certain there is no need to force them to meet. It sounded convincing, and the entire room fell silent. The leader continued to ask, what if you fail again? His cold, sharp eyes stared straight at him. There will not be a next time, the assassin replied. I will not disappoint you. The scene shifted to the training hall of Perdium Castle. Fergus entered. Sorry, young master, it is almost time for the meal. A mana sphere with an unpredictable trajectory flew through the air. Like a string, it instantly wrapped around the hilt of the sword standing beside the door, surprising Fergus. Then the mana thread was immediately retracted, and the sword now rested neatly in Ghislaine's hand. Ghislaine moved the sword gracefully and said, all right. That is enough. After that, he noticed his presence. Ghislaine spoke. Old Fergus. The man immediately bowed and apologized. You were too focused on your training. Then Fergus seriously asked, how did you just do that? Ghislaine released the sword and held it with the mana string in his hand. Then asked, you mean this? He replied, the mana string. It uses mana like a thread. Ghislaine recalled, in my previous life, I used it all the time. But with my current level, I need to make my mana core explode to use it like before because I lack mana. But if I only create one thread to consume less mana, I can still use it even with little mana. Fergus frankly shared, I thought I had trained mana for a long time, but I have never seen anything like this. He thought to himself, just recently, He could not even use mana, let alone train it. How could he think of using mana this way? Fergus said he came to see him because he had something to say. Ghislaine looked curious and asked, "What do you want to say?" Fergus bowed his head sincerely and said, "Thank you for protecting the young lady." Ghislaine replied, "You are thanking me? That is simply what I must do. Let's go eat." The Perdium family mansion, a few days later. The festival was postponed, which was completely reasonable because a knight protector had tried to betray and sell the young lady to the enemy. Elena sat at the dining table, pouting with slight frustration, and said, "Everyone thinks I am lying when I say that you were the one who saved me." She insisted, "You should go say something to them." Ghislaine brushed it off. "It is fine, they will not believe us anyway." Belinda clenched her fists in anger and shouted. "It was Jamal and Philip who tried to kidnap the young lady, right? Those bastards. I knew they were perverts." Elena could only sigh and softly call Belinda's name. He gently looked at his little sister in front of him, feeling relieved that Elena was still alive. He had been able to prevent a war from breaking out, but he knew for sure that they would not give up. Ghislaine was filled with thoughts. He could not keep stopping them alone. He needed to build a military force. At that moment, the maid brought the food. He reached for the knife and fork and thought to himself, "I must get more involved in politics to make that happen." When the lid was lifted, there was a piece of bread on the plate. Ghislaine was a bit puzzled. "Belinda, why are we eating dessert first like this?" She replied, "Dessert? What dessert? You know our situation." From outside came shouting, "Compensation." A middle-aged man yelled, "Compensation for the damage you caused by canceling the festival." At the same time, many townspeople came to protest, shouting in unison the word compensation. They pointed inside and demanded, "Come out! Are you drowning in money or what?" The guards, frightened, tried to calm them down. "Please stay calm." Ghislaine poked his head out the window and asked in confusion, "What the hell is going on?" Belinda replied, "I knew they would do this." She explained, "You know, our district is full of merchants who make a living from the profits of the festival. Right, last year they were satisfied enough. But since the festival was cancelled after only one day, it is understandable that they are angry." Ghislaine asked worriedly, "Is the situation of the district that bad?" In his mind, he thought, "This is bad. They will only become more aggressive if I do nothing." Ghislaine turned and ordered, "Old Fergus, what are the soldiers doing? Send them down to calm that crowd." He smiled and replied, "We have no soldiers." The answer left him utterly shocked. Fergus continued, "Most of them were deployed to the camp in the monster forest to rebuild after the orc raid." Ghislaine cursed under his breath, "Damn it, they are all there." Perdium was basically always in a state of war because of the barbarians in the north, and on the other side, there was the monster forest where monsters could appear at any time. Ghislaine's face showed clear worry. No money, no soldiers, what a complete mess. He put his arm around his tutor's shoulder and walked outside. "Belinda, let's talk." Then he whispered in her ear, "You are the one managing my money, right? Use it to calm those merchants down." Belinda replied bluntly, "There's not a single coin left." Ghislaine froze and asked, "Why not?" She immediately replied, "Did you forget that the Count cut off your allowance because you spent money like water?" Ghislaine had to stop and think. "So I have no money at all. I'm completely broke." He shamelessly held out his hand toward Belinda and asked, "Lend me some money." She immediately responded, "I don't have any either." A moment later, Ghislaine sat on the windowsill, looking out over his territory, muttering, "Damn it, no money, no soldiers, what do we even have?" He thought, "Without even a little money, I can't do anything. Even if I have knowledge of the future, I'll need money first." While Ghislaine was stuck with no way out, "Isn't there something on the estate?" At that moment someone came running hurriedly down the hallway. Ricardo stood in the doorway, panicked. "Young master." Ghislaine looked down and asked, "Ricardo, what's going on? Why are you in such a hurry?" The man looked anxious and quickly said, "There's a problem. Young Master Kane wants to see you." Ghislaine froze for a moment. Kane. On the other side, Commander Scovin was trembling, breathing heavily, his face bruised and swollen. Before he could do anything, another punch landed straight on his face. That huge bloody fist was ready to strike again. This time, the blow was aimed at Skovan's chest, and he screamed in pain. The impact was so strong that the imprint of the fist remained on his iron armor. Skovan fell backward, just as Ghislaine arrived at the doorway. Struggling, the commander looked up weakly and called out, "Young master." Seeing his man beaten to a pulp, Ghislaine's face showed clear displeasure. The commander's voice continued to echo, "You're here," as Ghislaine's sharp gaze locked onto the man before him. The man was huge, with bulging muscles, standing tall in front of him. That man was none other than Cain, who looked down with a mocking smile. Seeing him, Ghislaine frowned slightly but said nothing. He remembered that face. Today he came with a bodyguard. He was the heir of the Lodge's territory and a member of a family allied with Perdium. His name was Cain Lodges, and he had once been Ghislaine's only friend at that time. Looking at his hateful face now, Ghislaine knew he had also once been his enemy. Cain calmly stepped down and took out a white handkerchief while Skovan lay on the ground, bruised and groaning. Ghislaine asked his guard, "Ricardo, what's the situation?" He replied, "Just as you can see. We responded to a report about a disturbance at the tavern." Ricardo recounted, "We found Cain there with his night escort, and upon recognizing us, he asked whether the rumors about young Master Ghislaine were true. So, Commander Skovan explained the details of those rumors to him." At that moment, Cain grabbed his face with his huge hand. He coldly questioned, "You dare lie in front of the heir of Lodges?" Ricardo frowned and concluded, "And that's how it happened." Cain stepped forward and threatened, "If you plan to tell him, you'd better tell the truth." He claimed that you, someone who has never trained, defeated an orc barehanded and dealt with the traitorous knight escorts on your own. His voice continued as he looked down at the battered Skovan. "That's why I only gave him a small lesson to help him wake up." Standing before Ghislaine, Cain sneered, "This wouldn't have happened in the first place if you hadn't lied." Ghislaine fell silent for a moment. Then he thought to himself, "Yes, he has always been like this. He always treated me as someone beneath him." Ghislaine recalled his past life. Every time Cain came to Perdium, he always caused trouble. And even after creating countless problems, no one could say anything, because essentially, I was under his command. His eyes looked distant. No one ever underestimated Cain. Unlike me, who was always burdened by inferiority, his confidence and bold demeanor were praised as the worthy qualities of an heir. Returning to the present, Ghislaine appeared calm, having realized that this was why he had been criticized even more. His composed expression made Cain look at him differently. Smirking and furrowing his brows, he thought to himself, "Look at this guy. Normally he would have charged at me after such provocation." The scene shifted to some time earlier in the Lodge's territory. Cain sat there and repeated, "Killing Ghislaine." The assassin replied, "If you succeed in this mission, the noble one will support the Lodge's family." Cain looked puzzled. Dealing with a kid like him shouldn't be difficult, but Ghislaine is also the heir to his own land. How could I possibly eliminate him? The man answered, "We can lure Ghislaine into a duel, make it look like an unfortunate accident. It will only seem like a minor dispute between heirs. I will accompany you under the guise of a knight escort and direct the situation, so there's nothing to worry about." The mysterious assassin tried to persuade him, "This is a rare opportunity, even for you." Cain thought for a moment and then spoke, "I never expected to have to kill my own cousin, Ghislaine." His expression quickly turned excited as the sound of his knuckles cracking echoed. "Let's go right away." Cain glanced at the man behind him and wondered, are they trying to get rid of him because something about him has changed? He slightly curved his lips into a smirk, then said, "In that case, hey, what are you doing?" His voice calling out made Ghislaine a bit confused, though he still didn't respond. Cain continued in a puzzled tone, "Why are you just standing there? If you know I'm here, then you'd better bring what's been prepared for me." Ghislaine asked, "What preparation?" Cain replied in a low voice, "I heard the festival was interrupted, wasn't it? Let's liven things up and have a great time. We've always been in sync when it comes to things like this, haven't we?" His eyes narrowed as he spoke provocatively. Did I say something wrong, brother? Ghislaine appeared utterly indifferent after hearing that. Then, with a look of disgust, he replied, Are you talking about that? Ghislaine recalled. Yes, this guy always made me prepare wine and women every time he came here. He turned his face away, eyes half closed. I went along with his demands back then because I didn't want to be beaten, but not anymore. Because of him, I wasted my precious money. Ghislaine remembered what Belinda had told him about the Lord cutting off his allowance because he had spent too much. He suddenly realized, money, it's been here all along. Kane's image burned into his mind. This was his source of money. Kane continued shouting his name, startling him. He went on, If you remember, then you'd better bring them right now. Can't you see I'm waiting? Ghislaine looked at his annoying face and replied, Of course, I'll bring them right away. Then, with a cold gaze, he asked, But don't you have a debt to repay me? The assassin accompanying Kane looked puzzled, while Kane asked back, Debt for what? Ghislaine replied, Do you realize that I used my own money to handle everything you asked me to prepare? Pay it back. I'll charge 1,000 gold, including interest. Kane was taken aback, exclaiming, What, 1,000 gold? All that shouldn't even be worth 100 gold. He complained, And you did that because you thanked me for being your friend, like a friendship fee. Ghislaine responded bluntly, Friendship my ass. I've been the one exploited all this time. Hearing that made Kane shudder slightly. Ghislaine continued in a threatening tone, So pay up before I give you a real beating. I need a lot of money right now, got it? His demand plunged the tavern into silence. Ricardo grimaced anxiously. Young master, what are you saying? Kane stomped his foot with a loud thud and slowly stood up. His massive figure loomed over Ghislaine as he asked, Are you starting to act bold just because I've been lenient with you? Kane lowered his head slightly and mocked. It seems you think you've actually become stronger just because you spread a false rumor that you defeated a knight. You're nothing more than a parasite clinging to this land. He clenched his fist and continued, That is why everyone in the north calls you a bully, when all you do as the supposed heir is spout nonsense. Ghislaine stood there without reacting. This guy must have chosen death. He tilted his head slightly and easily dodged the unexpected blow. Kane angrily cursed, You brat, while Ghislaine stooped ready to counter. He delivered a punch to his ribs with his left hand. Kane winced, blood spat from his throat. But before he could spew more blood, Ghislaine followed with a straight punch to the face. Kane was no pushover. He raised his arm in time to block. Ghislaine was not surprised, remaining utterly calm, because soon after Kane fell to his knees before him, screaming in pain and coughing up a mouthful of blood. The assassin rushed to help him up and asked, Young master, are you okay? Ghislaine put his hand in his pocket and said wearily, Get up, stop whining, I know you blocked that blow. The disguised guard suddenly shouted reproachfully, Back off, Ghislaine, what do you think you are doing? The tavern crowd buzzed. What is this? Did Ghislaine just beat Kane? Did anyone see it clearly? He glanced coldly at them and then smiled smugly. So you want to play like this? Kane smiled and whispered to the assassin behind him. How did you like my performance? The assassin smiled back. Excellent. The stage was perfectly prepared to make everyone believe the fault lies with Ghislaine, enough to justify a duel. Kane reached into his coat to take something out, thinking with calculation. Of course, this is a rare opportunity to gain strong backing. I must ensure this time it leaves a deep impression. He recalled the promise of the cloaked man. If you succeed in this mission, the noble one will support the Lodge's family. Kane took out a green glove and thought to himself, This is the perfect time to cut down Perdium, a declining power. Then he raised his hand and scolded, You dare to do that. After besmirching the dignity of the nobility with lies and attacking me just because I was trying to verify the truth, Ghislaine, I challenge you. Before he could finish, a second glove was thrown straight into his face. Ghislaine stood there and declared, I challenge you, Kane Lodges. Then he turned and spoke, The reason you insulted me, the heir, in front of the people of Perdium and attacked my knight, defaming the nobility. Ricardo, who was sitting there tending to his commander, looked over. Ghislaine asked in a low voice, You are not going to deny that, are you? This action left Cain and his companion almost speechless. He smiled, wiping the corner of his mouth, then replied, I already knew you were stupid, but I did not think you were stupid enough to dig your own grave. Then Cain grabbed the sword behind him and said, fine, I accept your challenge. He pointed the tip of his sword at him and threatened, do not regret it even if you die. Ghislaine said nothing, remaining calm and composed. Then he called to his guard, Ricardo, bring all the merchants protesting in front of the castle here. These words startled him a little. Ghislaine smiled and pressed his palm together, admonishing, tell them that I will help them earn a great sum of money. The festival was suddenly cancelled. The atmosphere that had reached its peak suddenly cooled down, leaving some visitors unable to return because of regret. They must be feeling disappointed because they cannot spend money or make use of their leisure time in such a situation if an event takes place to ease them. And at this moment, Ghislaine's sharp eyes looked straight ahead. He stood there on the arena floor with a sword on his waist. The spectators around were cheering enthusiastically. The crowd began to murmur, this is the duel between young Master Cain and Ghislaine. Place your money on young Master Cain. That brat will finally get what he deserves. On the street, a shop owner was offering discounts, cheap prices here, buy one get one free. But the buyers were attracted by another voice from behind. The bearded man sitting there called out to the onlookers, look, come on, place your bets here, get in line. The gold coins were immediately thrown out. Finally, the tourists also had a place to spend money. They took turns betting. I will bet on young Master Cain. Me too. This is the safest choice. In the arena above, the sword was thrust straight into the ground by Cain. The sword was almost as long as his body. Cain questioned, how dare you turn a sacred duel into such a marketplace scene? He showed disdain, with his tiny eyes looking toward Ghislaine to remind, let me make it clear before starting. My sword will not stop even if you surrender. He appeared completely calm when he heard this. His expression did not change, and he did not respond to him. Ghislaine thought to himself when recalling the scene of Cain being provoked by the man beside him. That's right, and that must be what he is aiming for. At this time, he spoke back. Then, since it seems enough people have gathered, let's begin. Suddenly, from below, dark, the man in the cloak suddenly spoke up to stop. Wait. He stood out and commented, I don't think a proper bet can take place at this speed. This made the people there a bit confused. The bearded man holding the betting paper raised it up and announced, so then, no one is betting on Duke Ghislaine, right? So? He immediately glanced down at the betting table and still kept his silence. The audience continued to murmur, frankly speaking, the result is already too obvious that the brat has no chance against young Master Cain. Someone bring in a fool stupid enough to bet on the other side. Cain smiled disdainfully. Well, even the market has passed you by. While they were making sarcastic remarks, why don't I change the content of the bet? Let's change it to see how long he can endure against young Master Cain. At this moment someone was walking over. A large bag of money was slammed onto the table, making the bearded man extremely astonished. He, in a shabby appearance covered with injuries, spoke in a low voice, I will bet on Duke Ghislaine. On the stands, he smiled with satisfaction. Immediately after, a larger bag of money was placed on top. Elena crossed her arms in front of her chest and said, I also want to bet on my brother. Scovan and Ricardo stared in astonishment. This was something they had never expected. Above, Ghislaine also froze, looking down at his sister in surprise. The crowd in the marketplace shared the same expression. They exclaimed, Lady Elena. The girl asked, this should be enough, right? Belinda beside her reminded, remembering that I advised you not to do this. The bookmaker opened the money bag to check and replied, yes, this is enough. Dark stood there looking over with a displeased expression. In the arena above, Cain continued to complain, making me wait all this time, such a waste. At that moment, the announcement sounded, then, get ready. Ghislaine spoke, you know, I'm older than you. After all, it would be a bit strange if I were the one to strike first, right? Cain exclaimed, what? On the opposite side, he began to draw the sword from his waist. Then he spun it skillfully in his hands. Ghislaine swung the sword downward, his demeanor full of confidence. He spoke coldly with a disdainful attitude. "Coming at me." Cain froze. This provocation made him somewhat angry. He pulled out his sword, took a fighting stance, and replied, "Don't you think it's too late to act like an adult now?" The announcement of the duel began to echo through the market. Cain stomped his foot on the ground to gain momentum, then immediately leaped into the air. His massive body was now soaring high. With the large sword raised and ready to strike down, Cain unleashed a slash aimed straight at where Ghislaine was standing. He lifted his sword to his face to block it. A flicker of worry appeared in Ghislaine's eyes as the sword stopped right in front of him. Cain glared and shouted, "You have lowered yourself too much just to save face." He pulled his sword back, adding more force that pushed Ghislaine backward. Cain gripped the blade by the hilt and thrust the pommel straight toward him, but Ghislaine quickly swung his sword behind his back and bent down to dodge. Despite his massive frame, Cain's movements were incredibly swift. He pulled his leg back, then immediately unleashed a powerful kick. Ghislaine leapt to the side to evade, causing the ground where he had just stood to crack open. The crowd shouted loudly, just as expected, "Truly young Master Cain. He will not withstand even a single blow from him." Cain smiled smugly with satisfaction, looking at Ghislaine with contemptuous eyes. Ghislaine remained calm, silently assessing him. "Looking at this guy." Outside the arena, Belinda grew anxious. "What should we do?" "My lady, we have to stop them right now." The others remained silent. Dark stood there with a smirk, thinking, "It's too late. No matter who the opponent is, once they decide to fight Cain, they have already fallen into his trap." Overwhelmed by that terrifying strength, the opponent becomes convinced that there is no chance to counterattack, and they will pour all their energy just into dodging. Eventually, the opponent exhausts themselves, and after only a short while of evasion, they expose an opening. And then everything ends. Cain always wins that way. Returning to the current battle, he continuously unleashed attacks toward Ghislaine, but the latter swiftly dodged them all. Cain smiled and said, "You are still as nimble as ever. It seems your skills have really improved since before." He spun his sword skillfully, then gripped the blade with his bare hand. Cain struck down with tremendous force and continued, "Makes sense. You were always good at running away since the old days." Ghislaine hastily swung his sword to his side to block. Cain tightened his grip on his sword and roared as he gathered strength. He then pulled his arm back, and the sword's pommel quickly hooked onto Ghislaine's back, startling him for a brief moment. He swung his arm forcefully, sending Ghislaine flying into the air. The spectators widened their eyes and mouths in shock, while Ricardo called out anxiously, "Young master." Dark stood there smiling in satisfaction, thinking, "It's over. Ghislaine, die." Ghislaine's body was falling freely toward the edge of the arena, and the people standing there looked up at him. Ghislaine said nothing, his gaze fixed on Cain, who was still gripping his greatsword tightly. Ghislaine's foot pressed down, and his voice rang out, "I wanted to go easy on you." He bent his body forward, ready to charge, and continued, "But you've crossed the line." In an instant, he appeared right in front of Cain, his eyes flashing with light, and the sword in his hand was already swinging. A streak of light appeared on Cain's abdomen as Ghislaine, after closing the distance, swiftly slid behind him. Cain's eyes widened as he turned his head to the side. Dark, standing below, began to worry. Cain steadied himself by channeling mana into his legs. Ghislaine's face darkened, and he exhaled softly in relief. Standing upright, he commented, "Such foolish swordsmanship, truly the work of an arrogant swordsman. You must have thought yourself the strongest just because your opponents cower when you display even a fragment of your power." Gripping his sword tightly with both hands, Ghislaine continued, "Let me open your eyes." Upon hearing that, Cain grew so enraged that veins bulged across his face. He swung his sword again and shouted, "Oh yeah, and how do you plan to do that?" Ghislaine quickly lifted his leg, kicking directly at the hilt of Cain's sword, stopping the downward slash mid-swing. Then Ghislaine jumped up, kicking Cain's arm and using the momentum to spin multiple times. A series of strikes landed across Kane's body, from his back to his arms, and finally his waist. Kane, still roaring madly, swung his sword wildly to show off his power. His thrust was easily dodged as Ghislaine leaped aside. Immediately after, Ghislaine stepped on the sword, pinning it to the ground, leaving Kane stunned. Almost instantly, taking advantage of his opponent's weapon being neutralized, Ghislaine prepared to deliver the finishing blow. A slash cut cleanly across Kane's neck, leaving him completely frozen, unable to react. Once victory had been decided, Ghislaine stood there calmly. Kane's body was now covered in wounds, and only then did the blood begin to flow. The audience stood in stunned silence, unable to utter a word. Some gasped in disbelief, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. A moment later, the crowd erupted. What was that just now? Duke Ghislaine has improved so much. Wait, could he actually win this fight? Damn it. I bet all my money on young Master Kane. Elena stood with her arms crossed proudly, saying, "See for yourself," while Belinda's eyes widened as she looked up. Scovin squinted at the stage in astonishment. Dark's eyes glowed, veins bulging on his temples, his expression mixed with worry. He observed Kane and assessed, the wound is shallow, though he could have cut deeper. Did he hold back on purpose? Kane frowned, questioning himself. How could that brat display swordsmanship of that level? Ghislaine still stood there radiating confidence, having just defeated a formidable opponent. He cast a cold glance toward Kane without saying a word as the crowd gradually fell silent. Then, Ghislaine tossed his sword aside, leaving Kane utterly confused. The blade spun across the floor as Ghislaine's voice echoed, "A skill gap like this isn't entertaining enough." Standing tall, Ghislaine declared, "I will fight barehanded from now on." His words were a blatant insult to his opponent. Kane furrowed his brows and shouted angrily, "What?" Ghislaine stood before him and replied, "I think I should take this opportunity to teach you a lesson." He rolled up his sleeves. After a moment of contemplation, Kane spoke with a puzzled look and asked, "Educate me then?" Ghislaine rolled up his other sleeve and stepped forward, replying, "Yes, you do not seem to handle my swordsmanship very well, so I will take this disadvantage. Fight barehanded. You will do it better." He looked down and affirmed, "Instead, I will bet an additional 2,000 gold, double the original amount, on my victory." The audience immediately buzzed, "Barehanded, 2,000 gold. This is a one-on-one fight after all." Dark, standing outside, gaped in astonishment, sweat pouring down his face. Dark curled his lips in a smile, thinking to himself, he dares to challenge Kane in a one-on-one match. One must thank his madness at a time like this. Luck is still on our side. The bookmaker loudly announced, "Very well, an added bet for you. This will be a barehanded match. Young Master Ghislaine versus young Master Kane." The tourists rode the momentum and continued to place bets. "All right, a barehanded match, huh? I will bet more on Kane. Challenging that guy by strength is truly foolish." Seeing his current ability and demeanor, some people turned their bets, but this time I will bet on young Master Ghislaine. Kane smiled coldly, raised his hand to prepare to remove his cloak, his voice dropping, "Barehanded, huh? You make me laugh." With his other hand still gripping his sword, he continued, "Fine then, go ahead and fight without weapons." Kane swung his arm and threw his cloak into the air decisively. His eyes flashed with killing intent. He swung his sword and charged, shouting, "And I will use the blade." Ghislaine stood there with astonishing calm. Outside, Belinda shouted in worry, "This is absurd, young master. You should draw your sword too." Kane's massive body together with the sword he wielded prepared to strike down. With a wind-tearing sound, Ghislaine's voice rang out, "As I thought. I need to knock some sense into you." As Kane's thrust was executed, he immediately bent down to dodge, two fists ready before his chest lunged forward. Just as he was about to close in on Kane, Ghislaine suddenly halted. He pushed off the ground to change his attack direction. His figure glided lightly to the right, moving so fast it almost created an afterimage. He delivered a powerful punch to Kane's right leg, causing him to grimace in pain. Ghislaine's eyes sharpened. his left hand pulling back into position. He threw an uppercut straight from below, aiming at Kane's chin. A cracking sound echoed as Kane's head snapped upward, blood spraying from his chin. Immediately after, he dropped to his knees, face bent down in agony. Terror filled his mind. What? How could his punch move in such a strange way? Outside, murmurs of astonishment spread. Unbelievable. Young Master Ghislaine might actually win this fight. Calmly looking down, Ghislaine demanded, "Stand up. I have not even started yet." Kane clenched his teeth in fury, blood still streaming from his chin and mouth. The anger and mocking from the crowd only made him more ferocious. He charged at Ghislaine again with his sword in hand. A series of slashes came one after another, but with his agility, Ghislaine easily evaded them all. Kane muttered to himself, remembering. Meanwhile, Ghislaine smoothly grabbed Kane's arm and spun, throwing him off balance and down to the ground. He followed with a knee strike to the ribs, sending Kane's massive body upward. Kane's eyes widened, and he screamed in pain. Then came a flurry of punches as Ghislaine struck all over his enormous body. With each blow came Kane's groans, yet in his mind he held onto one thought: I must kill you to protect the future of the Lodge's family, because of Dark's promise to him. Everything began to blur before his eyes. Kane could no longer fight back. He was helpless until everything went black. Now trembling, his face swollen, both eyes puffed shut, only one question echoed in his mind: why? Meanwhile, Ghislaine stepped forward, grabbed Kane's hair, and lifted him up. Looking down, he sighed, "I feel sorrow for your father." While Kane was still struggling to understand his words, Ghislaine continued, "Count Lodges supported Purdom until it was on the brink of collapse. Simply because he was a friend of my father." Ghislaine's voice lowered, but in the end, his father's son had ideas that differed from his father's will. At this moment, Kane's eyes could barely open, and he was startled to hear these words from him. Flashback to several years earlier at the Lodge's mansion. A complaining voice echoed inside, continuing to help Purdom. Kane was there, furious, raising his voice. "Even though father is a friend of Count Purdom, we are already facing difficulties. Why does father keep helping that toxic land? It's no different from pouring water into a cracked bucket." While his father remained silent, Kane added, "Father has returned for less than a week, and now he continues to help Purdom." After a brief silence, Kane then spoke, "Don't go, father." His words caused Count Lodges to be somewhat unsettled. Kane continued, "Everyone has tried to stop father. Why does he insist on helping Purdom so much?" His father turned to him with a contemplative look and replied, "Because we are friends, that's all." Back in the present, Kane was now beaten to the point that his face was barely recognizable. Ghislaine's fist was aimed straight at him. Kane squeezed his eyes shut, almost surrendering, unable to resist. There was no further strike, only Ghislaine's voice echoed, "That much should be enough to teach you a lesson, right?" Kane slowly opened his eyes, full of confusion. Before him now stood a remarkably friendly Ghislaine, extending his hand toward Kane and gently saying, "Stand up." The hand was stretched out right in front of him, leaving Kane dumbfounded, unable to react in time. Then Kane bowed his head to the ground in resignation. His weak voice uttered, "I truly have lost," while Ghislaine still stood before him, waiting. The spectators who had been watching and placing bets were astonished at what was unfolding. Dark was no exception. All his plans to eliminate Ghislaine had completely collapsed. An announcement rang out. Young Master Ghislaine had won, and immediately the entire market erupted with cheers. "I won my bet. Unbelievable. My money." Elena also looked happy. She laughed loudly and shouted, "My brother won." Everyone was satisfied. Only Belinda widened her eyes in disbelief. At that moment, amidst the cheers of the crowd, Dark suddenly jumped onto the arena. He approached and shouted into Kane's ear, "How can you admit defeat so quickly just because you are at a slight disadvantage? What are you doing? I trusted you." Kane stood up, turned, and replied, "Let." He held his face, gritting his teeth and muttering, "Damn it, this big kid." At that moment, Ghislaine slowly approached Dark from behind. He smiled and asked, "Now, I have to do what I need to do, right?" Dark was once again startled and exclaimed with a confused expression, "What?" Ghislaine loudly declared to the crowd, "Everyone pay attention. This man is voluntarily paying for all the food and drinks for everyone gathered here." Dark gritted his teeth, face full of anger, and shouted, "What?" The people around cheerfully shouted, "Food and drinks. It's been a long time since there was a party like this. You are the best man, my young master." Dark turned and shouted at Ghislaine, "I do not acknowledge that. Retract what you just declared immediately." Ghislaine placed his hand on his shoulder and pressed down firmly. Then he said in a low voice, "This is the punishment for losing the match. You have to at least do this, right? And to make it clear, that money will not be deducted from the bet." He squeezed and pressed his shoulder down and continued, "Adding 2,000 gold to our bet, on top of the initial 1,000 gold. Ghislaine's warning, full of menace, was spoken. "If you dare to run, you will face the consequences." The huge shadow in front of him made him unconsciously fearful. In his eyes there was only the imposing image of Ghislaine. Dark knelt there, right beside Kane, and replied, "Understood." Scene changes to the Purda mansion the next day. Outside the window, looking into Ghislaine's room. Inside, a wooden chest was placed heavily on the table. He slowly opened the lid, looked at the pile of gold he had won from the bet, and exclaimed in awe, "Oh wow!" Ghislaine thought to himself, "I could hire a small group of mercenaries with this money. This is not a small sum." Then he closed the lid and calculated further, "But it will take a lot of time to earn more. They will not wait for me. To carry out my business plan, I must prepare faster." At that moment, two girls appeared behind him with smiles on their faces, Elena and Belinda. Ghislaine frowned at them and asked with an annoyed expression, "What is this?" Elena squinted slightly and asked, "Brother, what do you plan to do with that money?" He asked, "Do you want to know?" Elena, blushing, scratched her cheek and replied, "I was just asking a little." Belinda spoke up, "It's very obvious what he will use it for." She continued, "Amelia's birthday is coming soon, isn't it? You are doing this because you want to buy her an expensive gift, right?" While Belinda added, "You are very wise," Ghislaine remained silent. Immediately Elena continued, "Oh my, doing all that just to look better in the eyes of your fiancé." He froze in thought, a big question appearing in his mind, "Do I have a fiancé?" Thinking this, Ghislaine frowned at the two of them and asked, "Do I have a fiancé?" Belinda replied with exasperation, "Surely you are embarrassed, so you are pretending not to remember, right?" Elena sighed and continued, "It's Amelia from the Rayfold noble family." The answer left him stunned, but then the memories flooded back along with that name. The image of a blood spider appeared in Ghislaine's mind, that of a woman, Amelia Rayfold, a noble admired by everyone for her kindness and her impartial behavior. Like a half-bitten apple placed before a mirror, Amelia would later lead a rebel army and become known as the Witch of the North. His eyes flashed with memories from his previous life. Ghislaine recalled that later, together with Duke Delphine, she would sing a hymn about the fall of Perdium, a traitor. Ghislaine grinned slyly. He said to the two girls, "A traitor." Elena turned to ask her maid, "Belinda, when will father return?" She hesitated, "Probably in about a week." At the same time, Ghislaine also had his own prediction. A week, that should be enough. He stood up, stepped outside, and announced, "I will stop by the Rayfold territory." Belinda, hearing this, asked, "Wait, her birthday isn't here yet. Why suddenly?" Ghislaine glanced back and replied, "To get the money." Scene changes to another place. A girl in noble attire bent down to take off her shoes. On her mouth was the image of a spider, with red eyes. In front of her was a homeless little girl in tattered clothes. The girl had one injured eye, using the other to look at her, and called Miss Amelia. Without letting the girl speak further, Amelia interrupted, "If anyone has to go barefoot in my city, it will only be me." She turned and commanded the soldiers, bringing food and supplies to distribute to everyone. They stood solemnly and answered in unison, "Yes." Immediately after, the boxes were brought forward to the awe of the people in the slums. Then, Amelia and her soldiers left barefoot, followed by the endless thanks of the people. Scene changes to the garden of Amelia Rayfold, Count of Rayfold. Amelia was sitting there, having her feet washed by her guard. He was Bernarf, her bodyguard. Holding her small feet in his hands, looking up he exclaimed, "You have worked hard, my lady." Amelia reached out to stroke her cat and softly called, "Bernarf." While the cat enjoyed the sensation, her voice continued, "Father always demands absolute obedience from everyone." He bowed his head and replied to his mistress, "But those fools only obey the one who gives them warmth and sustenance, which will benefit your upcoming succession race, my lady." Amelia looked down indifferently, saying nothing further. Then she suddenly pressed her foot against Bernarf's face. Amelia asked, "How is your battle with the Northern Swordmaster going?" He remained in position and replied, "Forgive me, I am merely trying to minimize attention as much as possible. If I win, your actions would attract too much notice." Bernarf, carefully holding her small foot, continued, "It is not yet time to show your claws." He placed a reverent kiss on it and affirmed, "My sword belongs to you." Amelia suddenly lowered her voice and asked, "Then, what have I raised you to be?" She reached out and lifted Bernarf's chin in surprise. Then she moved closer, using her blazing red eyes to warn, "Do not become weak." Still in Amelia Rayfold's mansion, she continued, "What about the Trade Guild?" He replied, "If it's the Actium Guild, you need not worry." Bernarf continued, "They are busy purchasing materials to rebuild the monster forest outpost, half of which was destroyed by orc attacks near Perdium. In other words, we are diverting all the funds that Count Rayfold sends to Perdium annually." His tone grew excited. "We have also recruited all the soldiers and knights who left Perdium, many experienced troops trained by the barbarians, so the quality is top-notch." Amelia, hearing this, looked pleased. "Good, continue maintaining the normal trade guild disguise." But she still cautiously reminded, "We must not reveal our true identity until our power is fully established." Just then, the steward approached, bowing and said, "Forgive me." Bernarf stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves in complaint. The young lady was resting. "How dare you disturb her?" The servant immediately replied, "There is news from the gate. Master Ghislaine Perdium has arrived." This information displeased Amelia. She frowned and wondered, "Why has that troublesome man come here?" The servant grew anxious, sweat pouring from his face, his voice faltering. "The matter is, he has something to discuss about the Trade Guild." This statement left both Amelia and Bernarf wide-eyed in shock, accompanied by worry. Immediately after, the scene shifted to Amelia Rayfold's reception room. Inside, she sat on the opposite side of the tea table holding her white cat. On this side, Ghislaine placed his sword beside him and greeted, "Hello, Amelia." Before she could respond, her face showing little amusement, the cat suddenly let out a loud yowl. Amelia then complained, "It is very impolite to arrive without notice. Have you thrown away all your manners?" Ghislaine remained calm, asking while giving a reason, "Her birthday is coming soon, right? I intend to give her the gift early." Placing a flower on the table, he continued, "I found something from a guild outside the front lines. It has a very pleasant scent. I think from now on I will buy flowers there. What is the name of that guild again?" After a brief pause, he answered himself, "Right, the Actium Guild." Amelia flinched slightly, frowning, her gaze sharp. She stood up abruptly, her voice annoyed. "I do not understand what you are saying." She turned to leave, saying, Ghislaine remained seated, his eyes flashing green as he glanced at her, then spoke in a low voice. Amelia Rayfold sat down. His words made her pause, eyes wide and pupils constricted. The pressure radiating from him caused the water in her teacup to ripple. Amelia wondered, what is this pressure? She looked down at the young man sitting there, silently questioning, "Is this the same person who used to be flustered and stammering whenever he stood before me?" Ghislaine picked up the teacup, twirled it, and continued, "I'll be brief. I need money. Give me 10,000 gold coins." His blunt request left Amelia astonished. She complained, "Suddenly appearing and borrowing money from your fiancé. Is this the will of Count Perdium?" He answered straightforwardly, "It has nothing to do with him. Just give it to me." Ghislaine poured out the tea and added, "Besides, you have no intention of marrying me anyway." Her pupils constricted. Amelia threw a glance at her fiancé, both puzzled and worried. He calmly continued, "I suppose that's the night outside the door, right? Once you take power, why not? But before that, if the fact that you are secretly building forces for the Rayfold succession war is exposed," as soon as he finished, the cat in her arms leapt down and let out a sharp-snouted yowl. While it growled at him, Amelia spoke, "Young Master Ghislaine." She regained her composure, lowering her voice to admonish, "Even if it is a joke, you should not speak like that." Ghislaine responded in a gentle tone, "Do not worry, I will keep that secret. As long as I do not leave empty-handed, that is all." Amelia gave a cold smile and answered directly, "Never." Then she called for her bodyguard, Bernarf, and the door immediately opened. He stepped in with a displeased expression, unhappy that his mistress had been threatened. Standing between the two, he raised his hand to his chest in greeting. "It has been a while, hasn't it, young Master Ghislaine?" Ghislaine glanced at him and recalled memories. Bernarf, always standing on Amelia's side. Even back then, his skill was comparable to a northern swordmaster. Ghislaine spoke in a low voice, "Warning, if I die here, a territorial battle will break out. Can you handle that?" Amelia responded, "Of course," a troublemaker suddenly intruding and being killed by a bodyguard. She raised her hand as if confirming, "The world will know it that way." Amelia touched the spider on her face and commanded, "Kill him." Immediately, Bernarf received the order and drew his sword, frowning at Ghislaine. Ghislaine maintained a calm demeanor, thinking to himself, "If he intends to come this far, then I should take this seriously." He looked at him, smiled slightly, and gently grasped the sword beside him to prepare for the duel. In the spacious room, the heavy footsteps of Bernarf echoed, his blood-red eyes glowing with lethal intent, the sword at his side drawn and gleaming under the light. He immediately narrowed his eyes, furrowed his brows, and a cold snort escaped his throat, intensifying the tension in the air. Feeling the surge of deadly intent, Ghislaine's whole body tensed slightly, his gaze shifting with full alertness. At that moment, the suit of armor displayed behind him suddenly shook, metal clanging sharply as if something inside wanted to break free. Instantly, the armor exploded, and an assassin hidden within lunged out, brandishing a gleaming blade, moving at a speed like cannon fire, aiming straight for Ghislaine's back. Instinctively, he tilted his body slightly and glanced over his shoulder. The sword pierced deeply into the chair with a terrifying ripping sound, the assassin's speed making it seem impossible for the person on the chair to escape. The chair was violently thrown back from the force, and at that instant, Ghislaine spun his body, leapt off the chair, narrowly escaping. Seizing the momentum, he spun around and unleashed a devastating kick, striking the assassin's abdomen with a dry, resounding impact that made the man's eyes widen and his breath catch. His whole body was propelled backward, colliding with a shattered chair, and then he was hurled straight through the window like a thrown sack. Glass shattered with a deafening crash. Cold wind rushed in, carrying a faint metallic scent of blood. Amelia froze in shock, and Bernarf stood motionless, unable to believe what had just happened. Ghislaine stood upright, breathing calmly, his icy gaze sweeping over the two of them, a slight smirk on his lips, his low voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Assassin," feigning politeness only to strike sneakily. Ghislaine angrily swung his gleaming sword, each slash whistling through the air, his voice cold and grating. "This is a terrible way to treat a guest." Bernarf immediately raised his sword, his eyes icy, and the two clashed, each strike precise and skillful. As he struck, Ghislaine shouted in reprimand, "Does Rayfold have no sense of chivalry at all?" The clashing steel rang sharply. Bernarf spun to block a lethal strike with a decisive parry, then gritted his teeth and retorted, "Forgive me, but the true impolite one is Grand Duke Ghislaine, who charged in without a word, causing the young lady discomfort." His tone sharpened further. "With someone like that from the start, there is no need to maintain courtesy." As he finished speaking, he leapt, one hand pinning Ghislaine's sword. the other driving a deadly thrust downward. Yet Ghislaine twisted his body and escaped in an instant. Next, he leapt up, his knee crashing down on Bernarf's neck like a hammer from the sky. He managed to duck in time, but immediately took a full blow to the chest. This hit made Bernarf stagger backward a few steps. He pressed his feet hard against the ground to maintain balance, his face full of resentment, his mind full of thoughts. Grand Duke Ghislaine, I heard you are just a useless show-off. Seeing Ghislaine standing tall, his aura heavy and suffocating the room, Bernarf gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, silently judging with mockery. While he was still in contemplation, Amelia's voice rang from behind, sharp and full of anger. What are you doing? Are you really going to let that thug? Bernarf startled and turned around, his voice trembling. Milady. Her eyes were now red, radiating chilling malice, her tone sharp as a knife. Quickly bring his head down for me if you truly are my sword. Hearing this, Bernarf paused briefly, his gaze darkening as he seemed about to say something but did not. Yet everything condensed into a single sentence that burst from his mouth with determination. I will not disappoint you, his hand unconsciously tightening around the sword. Raising the sword straight toward Ghislaine, Bernarf growled with murderous intent. Come here. Ghislaine slightly frowned, a cold smile appearing at the corner of his lips, replying with disdain, a mere guard dares to give me orders. Bernarf gritted his teeth, each finger gripping the hilt tightly, his eyes bloodshot, murderous aura surging like it wanted to devour his opponent. His voice deep and threatening. I am holding back, but if you are unreasonable. Bernarf pressed hard. I will go along with your will. Finishing the words, he stomped forcefully on the stone floor. Then, without missing a single breath, he lunged forward, the sword swinging with wind-tearing speed. The steel blade flashed, screaming sharply like a wild beast, aiming straight for his opponent's throat. In that moment, Ghislaine sharpened all his senses, his pupils constricting. His body tilted to one side, knees bent, slipping by in the nick of time. Yet the tip of the sword still grazed his cheek, leaving a thin cut, a spurt of blood flying out. Ghislaine squinted, inwardly hissing, that bastard, fast indeed. But Bernarf did not stop. On the contrary, he roared, his eyes blood red, fury exploding. The sword in his hand became a whirlwind, each strike swinging wildly as if to tear apart the very space. Ghislaine was forced to counterattack continuously, the sound of metal clashing ringing intensely, sparks flying and lighting up the entire room. A bit farther away, Amelia stood motionless amid the sweeping sword aura, her eyes deep as a dark abyss, staring intently at the battle, silently thinking, Ghislaine, how could a thug like you possibly match a master like Bernarf? Yet, despite her firm self-reassurance, the corners of Amelia's eyes flickered with vague worry. But still, this battle... In the midst of the fierce fight, Bernarf suddenly hissed, closing in like a shadow. Pouring all his strength into a heavy strike, Ghislaine twisted his wrist, raising his sword vertically to block the blow. The two blades pressed tightly together, screeching harshly, the impact force shooting back into his arms, making him growl, muscles tense, veins bulging across his skin. Ghislaine pressed his strength, pushing the sword upward to redirect and press the blade toward his opponent. But in that instant, Bernarf suddenly twisted, not dodging but as if to embrace the sword. Just like before, his left hand reached out to clamp Ghislaine. A mad grin erupted at the corner of Bernarf's lips. His right hand swung the sword high, aiming straight for Ghislaine's head. The moment hanging by a thread, Ghislaine pivoted on his heel, body tilting sharply, slipping out of the sword's path in an instant. A cold wind swept by, the scent of death close to his ear. He turned, eyes flashing icy, voice full of disdain, echoing into the void, that moved again. Ghislaine suddenly burst with momentum, charging forward, twisting his hips to gain leverage, knees snapping strongly toward Bernarf's chest, the move that had nearly knocked him down before. Yet this time it did not succeed as before. Ghislaine was immediately squeezed by a great force. As if waiting, Bernarf's massive muscular arm swung, the punch exploding straight into Ghislaine's chest. He only slightly curled his lips, gripping Ghislaine's collar, veins prominent, his voice growling with contempt. A second time will not work. Bernarf exerted his strength and threw, Ghislaine's body flying before crashing onto the floor with a dry sound, the entire room shaking. He groaned softly, body aching, blood pouring and spreading red. But before he could recover, Bernarf lunged, the sword in his hand tracing a deadly curve, steel light blazing straight for his heart. Despite the pain, Ghislaine managed to kick the sword hard, deflecting its path and embedding it into the stone floor. Using the momentum, he twisted and leapt into the air, spinning midair before landing firmly like a beast. Ghislaine wiped a streak of bright red blood from the corner of his mouth, eyes flashing suspicion. Indeed, you used magic to enhance my strike. At this moment, Ghislaine's sword lay fully in Bernarf's hand, his steps slow and heavy, each pressing down on the air, lips curling with self-satisfaction. Grand Duke Ghislaine, you are far from what the rumors say. Indeed, you never truly know an opponent's strength without fighting. He flicked his wrist hard, throwing Ghislaine's sword aside as if tossing a scrap of iron. Bernarf smirked mockingly. Your swordsmanship seems honed through real combat rather than formal training. Perhaps from fighting too many barbarians you learned in their way. He strode closer, his voice growing more arrogant. That style of fighting might be useful on a chaotic battlefield, but against me it is useless. Standing right in front of his opponent, Bernarf's gaze swept coldly over Ghislaine's injured body. In that look of disdain there was an absolute certainty of victory. Your arrogance ends here. Ghislaine panted, sweat streaming down his face, inwardly thinking, indeed, this is going to be tough. Yet his expression showed not a trace of fear. His eyes flashed, recalling every move Bernarf had used, the deadly thrusts with the narrow blade, the sudden attacks aimed straight at the head, making both distance and timing unpredictable. At close range, the difference in physical strength made it impossible for him to dominate through technique alone. Seeing the dense aura of malice radiating from Bernarf, Ghislaine snorted coldly. From the beginning I knew he was not an easy opponent. Suddenly, he sprang up, brows furrowed, eyes blazing fiercely, his right hand swinging sharply, and from the sleeve a thin thread imbued with magic shot out like slicing through the air, his voice low and urgent. I do not have much time either. Without hesitation, he flung his hand straight toward his sword, sending the thread to wrap around it. Bernarf flinched for a moment, sensing a surge of magic approaching. The nearly invisible thread brushing past his body made him start involuntarily, whispering, magic. In the instant before he could comprehend what was happening, it seemed a strong force shot toward Bernarf's back. Ghislaine's sword had been tightly bound by the thread, magical energy erupting. Pulling the sword back with such force that the blade struck straight into Bernarf's back, the sudden pain staggering his body, a look of shock briefly flashing across his previously arrogant face. Seizing the opportunity, Ghislaine lunged upward, springing off Bernarf's thigh as a springboard, then spun into the air, his hand grasping the hilt of his own sword. Before Bernarf could react, Ghislaine's knee slammed straight into his face, a sharp crack ringing out, fresh blood immediately spraying, splattering everywhere. Bernarf was knocked back, his heavy body crashing onto the ground, face twisted, eyes filled with confusion and rage. What are you doing? On the side, Amelia watched her most trusted guard being gravely injured, her eyes widening in horror, her scream ripping through the chaotic air. Bernarf. High above, Ghislaine gripped the sword hilt tightly, steel flashing violently, radiating overwhelming murderous intent, while Bernarf was still clutching his face, groaning. Ghislaine swung, the blade whistling through the air, striking straight toward the head of the massive guard. Bernarf startled and reacted, his warrior instinct immediately raising his broad sword to block. The two blades clashed violently, metal ringing harshly, sparks flying brightly into the air, the downward force shaking his whole body, his teeth grinding out a roar. Yet Bernarf, being a muscular powerhouse with superior physical strength, poured all his might into pushing back the opponent's blade, the counterforce violently sending Ghislaine flying backward. Hanging briefly in midair, Ghislaine spun gracefully in a full circle, coat-tails fluttering, landing on the ground on the tips of his boots, touching down lightly, his stance firm and cold like a dark night. Bernarf panted heavily, retreating quickly, positioning himself in front of Amelia, his gaze serious, voice hoarse and deliberate. "Milady, leave here. I can no longer guarantee your safety." He tightened his grip on the sword, spinning the blade straight toward Ghislaine's face, his voice fierce and resolute. "From now on, I will use my full strength." Hearing this, Ghislaine slightly curled his lips, his voice dropping low. "That's right, let's do it." A faint smile appeared on his lips, eyes icy as they stared directly at his enemy, his tone full of provocation. "It has been a long time since I have met a worthy opponent like you." Amelia frantically clutched her cat, her dress fluttering as she rushed out of the room. Her heart was a mix of fear and frustration, grinding her teeth and muttering like a madwoman. "Ghislaine, how dare you humiliate me like this?" The sound of her footsteps pounded through the long, silent corridor, and throughout her run, one curse after another echoed in her mind. Who was it? Which fool dared to leak information about the trade guild to that madman Ghislaine? Otherwise, how could he know so much? In Amelia's mind, doubts churned, and every rumor about him resurfaced. The orc killer, the one who had protected his sister from assassins, even defeated the heir of the Lodge's family. She had always thought these were exaggerations or, at most, luck. But now, facing him herself, all of it had become a terrifying reality. This only fueled Amelia's fury, making her curse even more. "That damn bastard." She ran, whispering, her expression grim, hands clutching her cat so tightly they trembled. "What are my guards doing? Where are they all?" Before she could finish her curse, a scene unfolded that froze her in place. The main hall lay silent and drenched in blood. Corpses of soldiers scattered across the cold stone floor, blood pooling into bright red patches. And in the midst of this sea of blood stood a figure cloaked in black, hooded. She remained motionless as if waiting, and upon seeing someone approach, turned leisurely. Beneath the black cloak, her eyes shone with deadly light. Belinda's voice floated, soft as a breeze yet sending shivers down Amelia's spine. "It's been a long time, milady." That face, that voice shook Amelia to her core. She froze, cold sweat pouring, lips trembling, unable to speak. "Purdam's maid, why are you?" Belinda spoke little, a long hiss cutting off Amelia's stammering words. In the blink of an eye, the black-cloaked figure had closed in, a cold dagger pressed to the young lady's neck. A quiet voice, Belinda's, low and gentle, yet laced with chilling coldness. Amelia's body went rigid. Belinda's movements were too fast, too precise, leaving no time to react, and when she realized it, she had already become prey trapped in death's embrace. Belinda paid no mind to Amelia's stunned, terrified face, her gaze resting on the young lady's lips, where a red spider clung, her voice full of mockery. "Oh my, you still keep this disgusting spider on your lips." Belinda calmly raised her hand and gently caught the red spider from Amelia's lips. Her voice sounded soft, like a lullaby, yet it struck straight into the deepest dark corners of Amelia's memory. "Surely during the engagement ceremony, I remember overhearing the conversation between Count Rayfold and him." Amelia suddenly froze, every word, every syllable from Belinda cut into old wounds like a knife. "Your siblings had teased you because of those disgusting spiders, so you raised the spiders yourself for revenge." Belinda's tone shifted, from gentle to harsh, full of mockery. It was unclear whether she did this to overcome her trauma or to assert something. As soon as the words ended, she released the red spider, letting it drop onto the cold stone floor, lips curling slightly, speaking lightly. "Forgive me for saying this, but it is not suitable for you, milady." Her sharp-heeled shoe stomped down directly, the tiny creature trembling, crushed under Belinda's foot before it could crawl away, leaving a slimy red streak. Amelia's eyes widened, her heart tightening, her whole body trembling in shock. Before she could scream, Belinda's hot breath pressed against her ear, her voice returning to an eerily gentle tone. "Can you cooperate obediently?" Turning back to the duel between the two swordsmen. As soon as Amelia left, Bernarf immediately released all his pressure, waves of oppressive power filling the room, every speck of dust vibrating in the air. Ghislaine stood still, eyes narrowing, feeling the pressure so intense that even the space seemed on the verge of shattering. He inhaled deeply, thinking, "This atmosphere is truly heavy." Indeed, this observation was no exaggerated mockery. Bernarf's aura was genuinely terrifying, suffocating the entire room. He narrowed his eyes, his hoarse voice escaping in anger, "An opponent worth entertaining, huh?" Bernarf gritted his teeth, each word hissing out, "Humble mercenaries would say so, yet you dare to call yourself a noble like my milady." Ghislaine raised his sword in guard, eyes cold as he responded, voice indifferent but resolute, "Of course I am a noble. How could a simple guard like you understand?" The space fell into silence, only the sharp whistle of clashing pressure lingering, heavy enough to seem like it might crack the walls. Suddenly, a sword streaked like lightning, slicing through the air straight at Ghislaine. The two blades collided, sparks flying, illuminating Bernarf's flushed, furious face. His roar mixed with anger and contempt. "Young Master Ghislaine, do not tarnish the dignity of nobility." Bernarf leapt high, his figure like a whirlwind, the blade flashing through the night, each strike coming in rapid, powerful succession, fast and relentless as if to crush the opponent before him. Ghislaine immediately tightened his grip on the sword hilt, his eyes fixed intently on every movement of Bernarf, not daring to lose focus for a single moment. For even the slightest delay could mean instant death. A barrage of sword strikes came from all directions, right, left, diagonal from above, horizontal, moving so fast that the naked eye could barely follow. Ghislaine gritted his teeth, his body darting and weaving to evade. One thrust grazed his shoulder, the next strike suddenly shifted upward toward his face. Each time a blade sliced past, he felt the cold flash across his skin, shivering and silently screaming in his mind, "This guy, is he really that skilled?" Bernarf fought with increasing ferocity, gaining momentum as he continuously pressured his opponent, forcing Ghislaine into a passive cycle of spinning and dodging. The clashing of metal rang like a storm, the pressure mounting, Ghislaine's feet sliding along the floor, leaving long scratches across the stone. Yet, amidst the crushing force, Ghislaine suddenly lifted his head, eyes blazing brightly, his voice low, half praise, half challenge, "You strike with great force." In that instant, as Bernarf lunged with a deadly strike, Ghislaine twisted his wrist, swinging his sword to sharply redirect it, bending Bernarf's blade in a split second. Seizing the fleeting moment, Ghislaine poured his strength into a swinging arc, the blade tracing a dazzling spiral, the light flashing intensely, a powerful counterattack slicing downward. Bernarf faltered slightly, but his reflexes were incredibly fast. He immediately pulled back, pivoted, and blocked Ghislaine's downward strike. The clash of metal roared, sparks flying, illuminating both their cold faces in that moment of engagement. Ghislaine gritted his teeth, channeling all his strength into each strike. He charged forward, attacking relentlessly, sword images overlapping, each blow carrying murderous intent as if to cut through the very space around them. Yet Bernarf remained unnervingly calm, his eyes unwavering, easily parrying every strike as if it were child's play. Ghislaine's breathing grew more rapid, arms trembling from the recoil, when a low voice sounded right beside his ear, icy and chilling, "Young Master Ghislaine, it's over." No sooner had the words ended than Bernarf's sword descended with earth-shattering force, as if tearing through the night itself. This time, Ghislaine did not dodge. The tip of the blade pierced deep, tearing through his shoulder. Blood spurted everywhere, staining the floor in vivid red. But instead of glee, Bernarf's face flickered with utter shock. Ghislaine's resolute, ice-cold gaze was fixed on him, forcing Bernarf to involuntarily wonder if he really was ready to take a hit with his own body. In the next instant, Ghislaine suddenly spun, the sword sweeping upward in an arc from below, slashing straight at his opponent's hip. Bernarf was startled, immediately bringing his sword across to block, teeth clenched, voice heavy. "It seems I cannot afford to be careless for even a second, yet." With a single flick of his wrist, Bernarf easily deflected Ghislaine's blade to the side, simultaneously pushing his body back. Ghislaine refused to yield, pouring all his strength into his arm, launching a powerful counterstrike. Bernarf's eyes narrowed, voice deep with contempt. This is the difference between me and someone who swings a sword for mere amusement. As soon as the words left his mouth, he delivered a hammer-like kick, sending Ghislaine flying, slamming hard against the cracked stone wall. The entire room shook. Blood seeped through his clothes, breathing ragged, yet Ghislaine forced himself to stand. His lips curled slightly, a defiant smile full of implication, eyes cold and bright, showing not the slightest weakness, a bitter yet ironic thought flashing in his mind. Truly, this is an entertaining battle. Ghislaine used the brief moment to catch his breath, his mind analyzing. Every strike Bernarf unleashed was memorized, moving at speeds too fast for the eye to follow. With wide reach, relentless combos leaving no opening, he was completely controlling the battle. Even attempting to close the distance to counter with grappling would be immediately nullified. Ghislaine furrowed his brows, eyes flashing with thought. During the clash, Bernarf made the swords appear entangled to trick him into thinking they could not be separated. With his current amount of magic, Ghislaine understood that if he continued to defend against a few more waves like before, he would surely be crushed. Bernarf wasted no more time. He tightened his grip on the sword hilt, his entire body erupting with aura as he lunged forward like a bloodthirsty beast, sword pressure howling and tearing through the air, shaking the room violently. Yet Ghislaine stood motionless, neither dodging nor retreating. He thought inwardly, tightening his grip on the hilt, lips curling into a subtle smile, but with only the amount of magic. A smile rose within him, bursting like fire through every limb. He slowly straightened, eyes locked onto Bernarf, who was charging like a storm, confidence surging within, hand resting lightly on the hilt, not out of fear, but because the magic in his body was swirling violently. Ghislaine's eyes blazed like a sharp blade. One thing Bernarf had overlooked was his unique mental technique to channel magic. In that moment, Ghislaine's entire body erupted with a torrent of crimson aura, magic swirling violently, shaking the surrounding space as if it were being burned by fire. His legs bent to gather momentum, the floor beneath cracked, dust and stone flying as a powerful vortex propelled him forward like a projectile. The sword in his hand glowed brightly, the red light so blinding it seemed to swallow the darkness in the room. Ghislaine's third mental skill had been unleashed. Bernarf refused to yield, swinging his sword with full force, charging straight at Ghislaine. Ghislaine gripped his sword with both hands, wrists flexibly rotating, every strike raining down like a storm. The two swordsmen collided, the clang of steel echoing through the room, sparks flying, each blow seeming to crush the very space around them. At first, Bernarf maintained the upper hand. Every attack from Ghislaine was easily countered, his large, agile hands continuously blocking Ghislaine's blade. But as the duel progressed, the rhythm changed. Ghislaine subtly twisted his wrist, then suddenly brought his sword down in a powerful overhead strike, instantly knocking Bernarf's sword aside. The heavy blade was flung into the air, spinning before plunging into the stone floor with a shockwave that rattled the entire room. Bernarf froze, his body seemingly encased in ice, eyes wide, face stiff, terror flooding his mind. Young Master Ghislaine, how could you emit such an explosive amount of magic? Before Bernarf could recover from his shock, Ghislaine surged forward like a whirlwind, his sword radiating crimson magic, murderous intent swelling, aura rising fiercely like a tsunami. Bernarf had no time to react before Ghislaine's cold blade pressed directly against his forehead. In that instant, time seemed to freeze, Bernarf's breath caught in his throat, the icy killing intent seeping into his very bones, leaving him stunned and immobile. At the same moment, Belinda dragged the noble young lady along, her slender arm clamping tightly around her opponent's neck. Amelia's face still bore tears that hadn't dried. The cold, shining blade pressed against her pale skin, forcing her, despite her pride, to choke out. "Stop, 10,000 gold. Take it and leave." Ghislaine glanced casually, his eyes indifferent yet tinged with contempt. He panted lightly, voice laced with mockery. "Troublemaker, why didn't you do this politely when I asked?" With that, he immediately retracted his sword. Bernarf had yet to recover, frozen like stone, still sitting dazed in the arena. Belinda glanced around, lips curling teasingly. "Oh my, what a mess from a husband and wife fight." Young Master Ghislaine didn't bother changing his expression, replying nonchalantly, "Just a slight difference in opinion." He rested his sword lightly on his shoulder, stepping slowly toward his fiancée, eyes full of mockery. "I have some bad news for you, Amelia." Ghislaine's lips. The entire Rayfold mansion was now a picture of chaos, corpses and the wounded strewn from the entrance to the main hall, and several large rooms were severely damaged. In a corner of the room, the sharp crash of a vase breaking sent the cat scattering in fear to hide under a chair. Amelia smashed furniture in impotent fury, her hands trembling and breath uneven. Bernarf stood beside her, head bowed, voice pleading, "Sorry, milady. This is someone stronger than the rumors. It was my fault for not anticipating the situation." In an instant, he drew forth an amount of mana capable of overwhelming a high-ranked knight. Amelia's eyes froze, full of hatred as she hissed each word. "You have changed a lot, Ghislaine Perdium." Bernarf, flustered, asked softly, "Should we report this to Duke Delphine?" No sooner had the question been spoken than a slap landed across his face in answer. Amelia grabbed Bernarf by the collar, voice sharp. "Watch your tongue. Do you know how terrifying Duke Delphine is for you to say such a thing? If today's events leak out, we will be executed immediately." She released him, her words growing heavier. "The reason I secretly cooperated with Duke Delphine behind father's back is because I promised to support his rebellion in exchange for his cooperation to overthrow Perdium. If this is exposed, I will be killed by my own siblings." Blood boiling, Amelia frowned, her pupils twitching, fear turning into cold resolve. If the council already knows all the secrets, they probably know about this pact too. Whatever it takes, Ghislaine must be killed. Bernarf shrank back, bowed his head, and understood milady. Then she asked in detail about Ghislaine's condition to plan next moves. Bernarf replied that there were wounds on his body and a major wound on his shoulder. He recalled Ghislaine's moves and changes during the fight and affirmed that after unleashing that burst of mana, his condition would be unstable for the time being. However, as he spoke, he suddenly paused, his face darkening, but Bernarf's words came with a hint of tension. "If we do not want to leave traces, we cannot use the domain's knights." Amelia pointed to the map spread on the table, her voice cold as ice. "I know." She looked up, eyes as sharp as a blade. "We kept those kids for a time like this." Bernarf was briefly astonished, his expression worried. Could it be? Images of the hunting dog assassins they had raised flickered hazily in his mind. They were commonly called scum. Amelia slid her finger along the map to a small forest trail and spoke slowly. A seasoned battlefield hand, without humanity, without status, a specialist among those without clear identities, an organization that trades in assassins. Then she carefully instructed, "Send those people here. Choose about 18 individuals skilled in mana." Bernarf looked at the point Amelia indicated on the map, frowning as he thought, "Indeed, the chosen place is the small road through the forest, the only route from the Rayfold domain to Perdium." In his mind, he pictured the terrain and calculated, although it is easy to hide there, it is the most suitable place to deal with matters quietly and neatly. After understanding the scheming intent, Bernarf replied seriously, "Ghislaine has made me endure this humiliation, and will pay the proper price." The carriage thundered out of the mansion gate, wheels crushing gravel, dust trailing behind. Inside the coach, Ghislaine sat motionless, both hands carefully wrapping the still bleeding wounds. A doubt suddenly flashed through his mind. "Is it Amelia?" Fergus looked worried, bowed and asked softly, "Young master, are you all right?" Ghislaine shook his head slightly, then answered calmly, "Do not worry, lord, it is nothing serious." He rolled his shoulder to check with a small movement, thinking to himself, "The wound is not too deep, not that bad despite having overexerted." His thoughts quickly drifted to practical calculations. The 20,000 gold Amelia just threw into his hand, a sum large enough to rebuild the domain, enough to sustain operations for several years. Ghislaine's expression darkened as he planned. If possible, killing Amelia would be best. But a struggle for the domain, he clicked his tongue, might lead to chaos. He could not allow personal feelings to endanger Perdium. Ghislaine wrapped his cloak around himself, eyes scheming about the future. Perdium was in a stalemate, barely able to stop the barbarians, so this was the best chance to drive them back. He nodded in affirmation. My knowledge of the Demon Guild's secret will make people wary and cautious in their actions, right, Amelia? At this moment Ghislaine's gaze grew even more resolute for his coming scheme. This time I will make full use of you. While Ghislaine was silently contemplating, on the opposite side Belinda had been paying attention the whole time without taking her eyes off him. She quietly asked, "Everything happened exactly as you said, right?" Ghislaine nodded, but his posture showed a hint of puzzlement. Belinda continued to recount the plan. They told me that if they heard the fighting inside, then they would control the guards. At that time Lady Amelia would come out, so catch her as a hostage. Ghislaine shrugged, indifferent. I see, but I already assigned that task to Lord Fergus. While speaking, a surge of pain suddenly ran through Ghislaine's spine like an electric shock. He bent over in pain and spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. Fergus turned pale, panicking. Young master, are you all right? Ghislaine looked at his bloodied hands, worry evident in his eyes. It is already the third time that the core energy has been disrupted. The condition is somewhat better than before, but like this. Every time I use my power, it really causes trouble. At this time in his mind, there was only one thought. I must quickly find a way to increase my mana. Suddenly Belinda grabbed Ghislaine's bloodied hand and pulled. Then she carefully took his pulse with great attention. Ghislaine was still bewildered and looked at her with curiosity. After a few seconds, Belinda quietly drew a small needle hidden in her sleeve and then said, "The mana flow is completely disrupted." Her face did not change, but her hands showed astonishing skill. In a sequence of movements fast as lightning, Belinda pierced a series of extremely small needles into Ghislaine's palm. Over 100 needles hitting the delicate pressure points. Ghislaine watched this action of the female servant in extreme astonishment. Ghislaine tried to restrain himself, not yet able to react much. Then the feeling of chest tightness suddenly transformed. His chest contracted. A blood clot was coughed up with a heavy hoarse cough, accompanied by the sensation of blocked energy being released, lighter than before. Ghislaine looked at Belinda's needle-filled hands in amazement, feeling each new pulse circulating inside him. The mana channels had been partially cleared. He suddenly thought, if one does not understand mana well, this healing method could not be performed. Ghislaine sat quietly, sharp eyes staring straight at Belinda. Memories of the past rushed into his mind. He had heard that his mother had brought her here, so he thought she was not ordinary, and now, seeing the torrent of mana radiating from her body, he was even more puzzled. What special constitution does a person with this power have? He wondered why someone with such ability would only be in a remote rural area. Memories flashed quickly in his mind, recalling the meeting with old Frank at the fair, the brutal duel with Bernarf, and now Belinda, a hidden powerhouse. Finally, Ghislaine drew a cold conclusion. The more strong individuals in the territory, the better. The ones encountered so far were only the beginning. Just then, Belinda's voice sounded, breaking his thoughts. Young master. Her voice carried a slight tremor, but was determined. Because I trust you, young master Ghislaine. Whatever you do, I will always help unconditionally. So tell me, why did you take a large sum of money from Lady Amelia? Ghislaine slightly leaned forward, exhaled deeply, then calmly replied, I have something that needs money. But besides Amelia, there is no one around here wealthy enough. His straightforward words left both Fergus and Belinda stunned. They did not expect the answer to be so simple and blunt. Belinda suddenly flew into a rage, shouting loudly, No, I mean we risked so much just to borrow money, and that is the only reason. If this reaches Count Rayfold, it will be a big problem. But Ghislaine remained seated, his expression indifferent, his voice astonishingly calm. It is fine. Amelia will never tell father. Having said that, he suddenly changed his tone, his eyes drilling into Belinda. You trust me? Belinda clenched her fists, still seething with anger, but finally forced a smile and nodded. Yes, probably. Then at least tell the person who helped you escape danger what you will use the money for, okay? Ghislaine was silent for a moment, the perpetual smile on his lips gradually fading. In an instant Belinda's face went pale, her eyes widening in horror when she heard him mention the forest of demon beasts. Just hearing that name summoned terrifying images. Thick darkness, pairs of red eyes watching in the night, bloodthirsty monsters stalking step by step. Fergus sat dumbfounded as well. His throat choked, and he could not utter a word. Ghislaine looked at them both, his eyes blazing with resolve. I will clear the forest of demon beasts. Hearing this, Fergus sprang and shouted, No, young Master Ghislaine. There have been many great efforts to clear it since your great-grandfather's time, but before he could finish, Ghislaine cut in coldly. Lord Fergus, how did the task I asked you to handle before entering the city go? He suddenly faltered, his voice stammering a little. You, young master. Hesitating a moment, Fergus sighed softly. Though unwilling, he still had to speak. Yes, the person you want to find is indeed in the place you mentioned. But are you sure it is that person? What is his condition? Ghislaine answered seriously, As long as he is alive, that is enough. I will go there right away. Hearing that, Belinda hurriedly objected. No, you must return to the territory. With your current physical state, how can you go roaming about? Immediately Ghislaine's voice lowered as he asked again. Belinda, do you think after Amelia was treated like that they will leave us alone? Her temperament will... Bloodlust flared. Belinda immediately became eager. Young master, I am very skilled in combat. Even Lord Fergus is a knight. If necessary, I will handle it quickly and efficiently. Ghislaine nodded in satisfaction. You put my mind at ease. But that is not your role. Different fields entirely. Immediately after, his gaze deepened, full of hidden meaning. I need someone to lead the charge, and now I will go meet that person. Scene change. The carriage wheels stopped. Ghislaine's group stepped down. Before them was a dilapidated wooden house, stranded at the foot of a misty mountain, the roof tiles crooked, walls cracked, the desolate scene making the atmosphere even more frightening. Despite that they decided to knock. The rotten wood sounded hollow and dry. Belinda looked around and furrowed her brow, speaking cautiously. This family is completely... Aren't they on the verge of collapse? Fergus was also stunned. The address is indeed here. Before the group could discuss further, the old wooden door creaked and slowly opened. A tall man stepped out, long platinum hair, a thick beard almost covering his face, a stoic appearance like a giant stone block. Yet the eyes hidden behind long lashes were sharp enough to exert pressure on anyone facing him. His hoarse voice asked, Who are you? This appearance left the group stunned. The person they came to find, looking like a wandering vagabond. Belinda instinctively leaned close to Ghislaine and whispered, her voice full of doubt, Young master, is the person you told me to find really like this? Lead the charge. He looks like a patient about to die. Ghislaine remained unshaken, staring at the man and affirming, No, I have found the right person. On the other side, Gillian seemed to notice something. His brow slightly raised. He silently turned and stepped inside, his cold voice slicing through the mist like a knife. This young noble has too much free time. Do not waste my time. Get out immediately. Belinda was startled, hurriedly raising her voice. Hey, wait. But Ghislaine stepped forward, his voice firm and resonant like a hammer strike. He is the captain of the Ratatoskr Mercenary Corps. Gillian. At this, Gillian's broad shoulders slightly froze. He slowly turned his head. A gleam like steel striking steel flashed in his eyes, full of alertness and hidden meaning. In contrast, Ghislaine looked straight at him. Beside him, Fergus was equally astonished. Ratatoskr mercenaries. Ricardo also muttered, See, could it be? The legendary Ratatoskr Mercenary Corps. A place only those proficient in nearly all types of weapons could join. Though now disbanded, their courage was renowned across nations. Any knight would have heard of their names, and the leader of that mercenary corps was Gillian, the very bearded man living in this shabby house. Ghislaine's eyes blazed with determination, his voice echoing through the dense air. I have come here to find you." As soon as the words ended, a gust of wind whistled sharply. From inside the house, a massive axe gleamed and shot out, the cold metal shining like lightning striking straight down at his head. At that life or death moment, Ghislaine did not dodge at all. He only slightly tilted his head, the axe slicing past his face, tearing through the cloak and leaving a long cut. Belinda, Fergus, and Ricardo all paled, their breaths caught in their throats. Inside, Gillian's rough hands appeared, an ethereal glow flickering over his muscular arms, his hoarse voice roaring, "So, you know me." The group immediately drew their weapons, forming a line in front of Ghislaine, metal glinting, breathing rapidly, everyone tense to the extreme. Gillian stepped fully into view, his body erupting like a mountain, mana blazing like white fire, killing intent surging, freezing the air around him. His eyes glinted with a deadly chill. He roared with lethal intent. "What is the matter?" Belinda gripped her knife tightly, both hands trembling, her voice urgent and cautious. "Step back, young master. His condition is not normal." But completely contrary to the tension of his companions, Ghislaine only slightly curled his lips, his voice deep and commanding. "Eternal punishment." A short, meaningless sentence to others, yet it made Gillian abruptly pause, his eyes narrowing, gaze shaken violently. Ghislaine stepped forward, his voice sharp as a hammer strike. "I know how to cure your daughter's incurable disease," and the entire courtyard fell silent. Ghislaine furrowed his brow, his determined gaze piercing into his opponent's heart, emphasizing each word. "Now do you want to talk? This cruel disease manifests as high fever, and also causes patients to cough up blood. Red spots gradually bloom across the body like flowers. This incurable disease makes its victims writhe in agony as if enduring the punishment of a criminal. Thus it is elegantly called eternal punishment." In the shabby house, Gillian's little daughter suddenly appeared, writhing in excruciating pain. He hurriedly ran over, clutching his daughter tightly with both hands, shouting her name, "Rachel." Ghislaine stepped forward to observe carefully and concluded, "It's still not too late." At that moment, memories from his previous life flooded back. That year he had tried every way to recruit Gillian, but back then the man was no longer alive, for after his daughter's death, he had decided to abandon everything. Suddenly Rachel's voice rang out in pain. "It hurts too much. I want to die, please." At that sight, the sturdy man from before was gone, replaced by the utterly despairing collapse of Gillian. Ghislaine thought to himself, "No more hesitation," and quickly removed his coat, throwing it aside, then rushed forward. It must be treated immediately. But at that moment a hand reached out to stop Ghislaine. Belinda looked at him seriously and spoke, "Let's go back, young master." She glanced at the girl writhing in pain, her voice full of despair. "I don't know what you intend to do, but this is not a problem that can be solved with force. Even the priests cannot cure it. They call it the punishment of the gods. What do you intend to do?" Without letting Belinda finish, Ghislaine flung his hand free, his attitude full of confidence. "I can cure it," making his maid panic. "Young master." He turned back, his eyes shining with a glint of light, lips slightly curved. "You said you trust me." This made Belinda silent. Though worried, she could not argue. Then Ghislaine held out a piece of paper to Belinda. "Here, take this." He instructed her carefully. "Buy all the medicinal ingredients listed here. Do not miss anything." Belinda's eyes quickly scanned the contents of the paper, her face gradually turning astonished. "This is—" Ghislaine turned to look at Gillian and his daughter, thinking to himself, for mercenaries traveling from place to place, knowledge is the decisive factor for survival. The disease's eternal punishment is currently incurable, but in the future there will be a cure. After preparing all the necessary materials, he immediately began the process of compounding. This disease had once caused a stir, but the method of making the medicine was quite simple, so Ghislaine still remembered it clearly. However, the difficulty here was that the ingredients were extremely expensive. He took from a small pouch a small flower glowing with a purple light, called the Blessing of the Fairy. The compounding formula was sequential, step by step. First crushing the blessing of the fairy and the herbs. Next, Put them in a flask and pour in a measured amount of strong liquor. Then shake vigorously until the mixture blends evenly, and wait a little. After that, add the remaining ingredients and stir thoroughly. Ghislaine's focus at this moment was absolute. After a while, the antidote for eternal punishment was completed. He handed it to Gillian and slowly said, "Give it to her." He received it and had his daughter drink the entire bottle. Gillian may still not fully believe in its effect, but after a long period of hopeless treatment, this potion was like a lifeline he desperately grasped for. After Rachel took the medicine, her breathing gradually eased and the pain subsided. A little later, the red spots on her face slowly faded. Then her neck, shoulders, arms, and legs, the entire blood-red body of Rachel gradually returned to its natural pinkish white skin tone. Her condition improved so quickly that everyone in the house was extremely astonished. Fergus couldn't help but exclaim, "The red spots," Belinda, standing beside him, added, "They are fading." Hearing this, Gillian, in despair, suddenly jumped up with astonished eyes. "Rachel, this potion really—" Ghislaine, standing behind, smiled slightly, indeed, very effectively. Yet he turned to look at Ghislaine with extreme skepticism. How could it be? Even divine power could not cure her. Ghislaine explained, "The divine power of the priests is not omnipotent. It only strengthens vitality and the body's regenerative ability to resist illness. It is different from a method that cures fundamentally." Upon hearing Ghislaine, Gillian's huge hands trembled, words choking in his throat. "So that means—" He bent down, knelt on the wooden floor, his rough hands trembling as they touched the young man in front of him as if confirming the impossible. "Can my daughter really be cured?" Ghislaine nodded calmly, firmly. "In 1 to 2 months, she will certainly recover." Gillian's eyes quickly shifted from doubt to hope. Gratitude and astonishment surged. He could not contain himself and bowed, placing his hand on his chest, bowing before the young noble like before a savior. He lowered his voice and asked directly, "What do you want from me? Surely you came here for a purpose." Pausing for a moment, gripping his chest tightly, Gillian continued, "But all I have left is this frail, broken body." His voice choked, then suddenly surged with determination. "If you want me to be a dog, I will be a dog. If you want me to be a slave, I will also be a slave." Ghislaine did not respond immediately, only looked straight, then calmly extended his hand. "No, I don't need a slave. I need Gillian, the leader of the Ratatoskr Mercenary Company." Hearing this, he lifted his head and accidentally met a piercing gaze that astonished him. Those eyes. What looked at Gillian was a deep blue gaze blazing with ambition, the eyes of one harboring a dream. In that instant, something stirred within him. A decision was awakened, and he reached out to grasp his long silver hair. His hands trembled, but with resolve, Gillian swung the axe and cut off the long hair he had grown for so long. The hair fell heavily onto the wooden floor, a sign of abandoning the past and the rebirth of a leader. This decisive act stunned the entire group. All eyes turned to Gillian. Except for Ghislaine, the other three were completely astonished, unable to believe their eyes. It was impossible. He was entirely different from before. The man who had been taciturn and aged suddenly transformed. His face was bare, no beard or mustache, his aura powerful, walking with the imposing presence of the leader of a Golden Era mercenary band. Gillian spoke plainly without any flourish, turning to rummage through the pile of old weapons in the house, searching for something. At the same time, he faced them again, his voice entirely different, more solemn, asking, "Besides these people, is there anyone else coming or accompanying us?" Ghislaine replied immediately, "No, it's just us." At this moment, Gillian selected a spear of suitable length with a pointed tip and a long rope, then asked further, "Is there anyone who hates the young master?" Ghislaine nodded, his voice heavy, "Yes, and there will be more." Gillian inhaled deeply, gathering strength in his arms, muscles coiling, his lips uttering 2 dry words, "Very well." Without further explanation, Gillian swung hard, took momentum, and threw the spear. The long rope followed like a whip. The spear shot forward, piercing through the wooden wall. It flew past the dense bushes beside the house and disappeared into the forest shadows. The group held their breath while Gillian stood firm, still gripping the rope, lips pressed, waiting. After a moment, the rope began to tug. A pulling force returned. The hidden object was immediately yanked out from the forest by the long rope. He braced his body and pulled once more. Soon after, a human assassin stuck to the spear tip was pulled out. Gillian did not hesitate, grabbing the assassin by the neck with one hand, squeezing so tightly that the man choked, a groan of pain escaping. Gillian's eyes flashed with ruthlessness and determination, his voice low and pressing, "Who sent you?" It turned out to be an assassin sent by Amelia to spy. Although his body trembled from pain, his words were sharp as he demanded, "How do you know?" Gillian paid no attention, quickly turning to ask Ghislaine, "What are you going to do?" Ghislaine remained silent and calm. "I think I know who is behind this." A sigh echoed, Ghislaine's hand grasping the sword at his side. His voice heavy, "I didn't want to act today, but," however, before his sword could be drawn, Gillian's massive arm blocked it. He said in a deep voice, "I will handle this for you." With that, his hand tightened around the assassin like gripping a chicken's neck. In agony, the man let out a desperate scream before dying. After dealing with the spy, Gillian once again turned and respectfully bowed before Ghislaine. This scene made Belinda slightly uneasy, a doubt creeping in her mind. Acting without hesitation at all. Why would the young master recruit such a dangerous person? Gillian solemnly knelt on one knee before the young noble he had once looked down upon. His voice was low, eyes resolute yet exuding complete loyalty. "Young Master Ghislaine Perdium, from now on, my life belongs to you." This outcome truly pleased Ghislaine. Inwardly he thought, "With this, I now have an important piece for the plan to rebuild the territory." Ghislaine calmly met his gaze with a look of anticipation and replied, "I am very glad to cooperate with you, Gillian." In a ramshackle wooden house, tilting amid a damp swamp, the air thick with the smell of mold and malice, a voice echoed from inside. A scout squad had just been killed. Inside were the comrades of the man who had just fallen at Gillian's hands. Anger flaring, the group shouted, "What, these idiots!" Suddenly a shout like a cold blade rang out, instantly silencing all chaos, bringing silence. In the center of the house, on a rickety chair, a man sat with his face slightly bowed, a hoarse growl escaping his throat. Softly, he was Viego, captain of the Claw Guild. The subordinates who had just been shouted at shrank back, faces to the ground, not daring to breathe heavily. "Sorry, Captain." Viego's eyes swept the room. Then he slowly spoke. "According to Bernarf's information, with the current strength of young Master Ghislaine, don't even talk about killing. Even finding the scout squad would be impossible, whether it's due to the scouts' incompetence or false information." One among them, sweating profusely, tongue-tied, stammered, that." He hesitated for a long moment before finally trembling and saying, "It seems Gillian has joined his group." Those words were like a dagger thrust into Viego's back, and he immediately sprang up, moving like a gust of wind, his powerful hand grabbing the subordinate's neck, squeezing tight. His eyes blazed, filled with murderous intent, each word uttered like a death sentence. "Are you telling the truth?" The man's whole body shook violently, face purple, throat constricted, but he struggled to force out each broken sound. "Yes, I saw it with my own eyes." Viego was silent for a moment, then the corner of his mouth lifted into a smile full of hidden meaning, both cold and mad. "Gillian," he muttered, as if speaking to himself, "finally you've acted, my former captain." Scene change. A carriage dashed along the dark forest road at night, the pale moonlight filtering through dense tree canopies. On the driver's seat, Gillian sat steady, his rough hands gripping the reins tightly, letting the horse push forward with full force. Inside the carriage, Belinda huddled, wedged between heaps of cold weapons, swords, axes, spears, even a few warhammers clashing with dry sounds at each jolt. She frowned and complained, "It's too cramped." Belinda's eyes glanced at the pile of lifeless steel, unable to hide her irritation. "This uncle isn't even a merchant. 1 or 2 swords or axes would be enough." Why bring all this clutter, which is why another carriage had to be bought? In contrast to that discontent, Ghislaine sat completely at ease, arms crossed, eyes distant. He answered calmly, his voice unconcerned. After all, a carriage was needed to take Rachel comfortably. In another part of the forest, another carriage rolled away, carrying Fergus, Ricardo, and little Rachel, both convoys, each with a purpose, gradually separating from the starting point. On this side, Ghislaine slightly lowered the window curtain, looking into the pitch-black void outside, the cold night wind slashing in, making him speak in a low, full of meaning tone. Everything will be useful, so be patient a little. His voice grew heavier, like a harbinger of ill. The most important thing now is to... The carriage wheels began rolling into a treacherous path, where steep cliffs enclosed the narrow road at the bottom of the mountain trench. Darkness flickered as if swallowing everything. Surely those on the carriage already sensed that right here, a massive trap had been set, only waiting for them to step into the deadly snare. Suddenly Belinda glared seriously and asked, "Young master, about the one we caught earlier, the one who was following us. He must have been sent by Miss Amelia, right?" Ghislaine casually nodded, almost certainly. Hearing this, her eyes softened slightly, worry spreading across her face. This could be a bit troublesome. Recalling the assassin's appearance, Belinda confirmed, "The mask he wore is the symbol of the Claw Guild, a fairly powerful guild in Rayfold." Ghislaine immediately leapt up, face full of curiosity. "The Claw Guild, huh?" Belinda explained, "They are filthy scum, specializing in smuggling, assassination, drug trafficking, and human trafficking, doing all sorts of dirty deeds." She also knew that among them were many skilled former mercenaries. This is a dark guild with real firepower. This knowledge from the maid caused Ghislaine to be slightly suspicious. Belinda has only been in the castle. How could she know all this? The sudden question startled her. She turned her face awkwardly away. "Well, before entering the castle I had a bit of..." She stopped mid-sentence, then changed the subject. "Anyway, they are as tenacious as leeches, so be careful." Ghislaine's lips curved slightly into a smile, showing no sign of worry or fear. He looked at Belinda and spoke slowly, firmly, "It will be fine, don't worry." Ghislaine's gaze shifted toward the large swordsman driving the carriage, his tone utterly confident, "Because we have Gillian." The carriage rolled ever deeper into the forest, the night air thick, only the pounding of hooves on the dry ground audible. Suddenly, right under the ground just crushed by the wheels, strange rustling noises arose. The ground trembled slightly, then abruptly bulged into two large mounds. As if something was rising from the underworld, waves of subterranean movement ran parallel on both sides, quickly closing in, clamping around the carriage. Realizing someone was tailing them, Gillian's eyes flashed with vigilance. No sooner had he finished than two figures shot out of the ground like blades springing from a sheath, raising their swords to attack from both sides. Gillian remained unfazed, lips curling slightly, uttering with disdain, "Attacking from underground, huh?" In an instant, he swung both arms behind his back, gripping two weapons. Both weapons were drawn with blinding speed to either side, a gleaming short blade and a heavy battle axe, the clash of metal echoing sharply. Gillian swung the blade to block the sword lunging from the right. Simultaneously, he hurled the axe to intercept the slash from the left. The blocks did more than just stop the attacks. They countered with brutal force. Space seemed to tear apart, and their bodies were cleanly bisected. Fragments fell to the ground with grisly sounds, fresh blood staining the earth, the air thick with the metallic stench. Yet there was no time to settle, as two other assassins hidden nearby sprang into action, simultaneously drawing knives and cutting the pre-tied ropes high above. A massive log fell from the treetops, aimed directly at the galloping carriage. Gillian looked up with a sharp glare. "It's a trap." Belinda poked her head out of the window, eyes wide with alarm. "We're going to be buried." Gillian frowned, growling softly, yanking the reins with both hands, forcing the horses to swerve sharply. The heavy log slammed into the ground just in front of the carriage, sending a violent shock through the forest, rocks and dirt scattering, a thunderous crash echoing. If Gillian had hesitated even half a beat, the carriage would have been crushed into splinters. Ghislaine, sitting inside, exhaled quietly, his voice low but resolute. Indeed an ambush, though this seems like something I anticipated. From the thick shadows, the Claw gang in black cloaks appeared simultaneously, surrounding the carriage. Leading the gang was Viego, stepping forward with a cold, knife-like tone, former captain of the Ratatosker mercenary squad, Gillian. The words caused Gillian to pause slightly. He truly did not remember him. Viego stepped forward, full of arrogance, mocking. The cowardly man disbanded the mercenary squad for the sake of his daughter. Gillian had already stepped down from the carriage, his demeanor calm, replying coldly, "I do not understand what you are saying." That only fueled Viego's rage further. He stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. "Because of you my life was ruined. Have you grown so old you can no longer remember your former members?" Gillian simply stared at Viego, his eyes calm as if probing for something in his words. Gillian's silence was like salt in Viego's pride, pushing him to the edge. He growled, pretending not to know, "I will help you remember." Instantly, the captain roared orders, "Kill him." The moment he spoke, Viego's subordinates surged forward like a fierce wind. On the other side, Ghislaine peeked out and asked if I should help. Gillian shook his head slightly, his voice low but confident. "No need. It seems he has business with me. So young master, just rest." Then he stepped forward holding the axe tightly, his gaze like steel. "I alone am enough." Gillian's entire body radiated a dense fighting aura ready to face battle. Although outnumbered, that power was enough to terrify the assassins. One sweeping axe blow sent blood and flesh flying. Anyone caught in its path was doomed to be torn apart. The Claw Guild members immediately grew furious and charged like enraged beasts. "That old man, how dare you?" Yet Gillian paid no mind. He drew another small weapon, coordinating both hands with practiced rhythm. Attacks poured out continuously like rain. One by one they fell to Gillian. A bloodthirsty man rushed in and Gillian held him by the right hand while the left hand finished him by removing his arms. Another who ran forward suffered the same fate. His body ripped apart and fell without a cry. Outside, Viego paced anxiously, both amazed and bitter. Indeed, the strength from his mercenary. He roared out orders, each group scattering and surrounding him. Immediately assassin squads lunged from both sides at great speed. Gillian only offered a cold smile, then vaulted onto his horse in one decisive motion, gripping the reins to surge the mount forward. The assassins did not expect him to use the horse. Gillian gripped his weapons and charged like a storm. The spear spun, the Claw gang took defensive positions, and the clash became a bloody melee. The sharp axe in Gillian's hand flashed with deadly light, and his eyes swept the scum of assassins below with contempt. The axe blade fell, bodies collapsed everywhere. Wherever Gillian's horse passed, the place turned into hell. In this situation, the clawmen hesitated, unable to approach him. One of them, seeing his comrades falter, angrily shouted, "You fools, aim for his horse." Gillian's weapon skills were extremely deft, not only holding the long axe shaft directly, but also controlling it by a rope. He gripped the rope and spun, causing the charging assassins to be sliced in two. Inside the carriage, witnessing the whole bloody battle, Belinda could not help exclaiming, "Impressive, so strong." Viego could no longer stand by and charged forward with a knife. Gillian immediately produced a large shield to guard his chest. Viego struck down from above attempting a stab, but the shield blocked it. His claws sank into the shield, his eyes blackened, a hiss escaping his throat. Having ruined someone's life, at least do not stand in the way. Viego's eyes brimmed with killing intent, as if he wanted to devour Gillian alive, and he had several throwing knives ready. He shouted, "I will kill you." Immediately Viego crouched to gain momentum and leaped into the air, swinging down to launch a weapon that struck the horse in the neck. It let out a painful shriek and reared wildly. Gillian immediately jumped off the horse before the animal fell. Taking advantage of that, Viego closed in and slashed at Gillian's shoulder with his sharp claws. However, Gillian reacted in time. The short axe quickly blocked the attack. the sound of metal clashing chilling to hear. In that moment Gillian's other hand lunged forward and punched Viego hard in the face, while also declaring, "I am not the former captain of the Ratatoskr mercenaries." That remark was like pouring fuel on a fire, making Viego even more enraged. He gritted his teeth, feeling betrayed. His body was shoved and slid along the ground for a distance. Viego staggered and tried to get up, his tone somewhat reproachful. "Former captain, how could you?" He ground his teeth and shouted in fury, "Stop spouting nonsense. If not you, then who?" Gillian tightened his grip on the axe, remaining calm as he replied slowly, "I have abandoned the past." He looked at the assassin before him and affirmed, "Now I am only a subordinate of young Master Ghislaine." This decisive answer was like a knife driven deep into Viego's heart. His eyes suddenly flared red, and he clenched. The clang of weapons, the crash of fists, and the roar echoed throughout the mountain pass, as if tearing the space apart. Viego continuously charged with whirlwind speed. Gillian was not inferior. The large shield in his hand spun rapidly, forming an iron wall blocking every strike. Failing repeatedly to approach, Viego angrily took a running leap into the air and drove all his strength downward. Gillian once again raised the shield to block. Viego's metal claws were stuck into the shield's surface. He pressed his head against it, screaming with rage. "When you left, the mercenary corps collapsed. Because of you, I lost my purpose and lived a miserable life just to survive." These insane screams only made Gillian more indifferent. He frowned, swung his arm strongly, withdrew the shield and gripped the axe in the other hand, slashing horizontally at the opponent's waist. But Viego quickly leaned back, dodging the heavy axe. Using his speed advantage, he flipped and launched a kick. Gillian turned, muscles bulging, raised his arm to block the violent kick. Bang! The sound of breaking metal rang out. His favorite shield was pierced with a deep hole. Gillian glanced at it and sighed silently. Viego continued to shout at the former leader, "Gillian, I was willing to dedicate my entire life to the Ratatoskr mercenary corps with all I had." His eyes were filled with both sorrow and anger staring at Gillian. "Yet you abandoned everything to become the servant of a corrupt noble." A red deadly light flashed in his eyes. In his hand 3 throwing daggers gleamed, marked with glowing blue runes, which could not be forgiven. He swung his hand. The 3 daggers like lightning tore through the air at incredible speed. Gillian remained standing, did not dodge. He braced his powerful arms and spun his weapon. The massive axe twirled like a storm, creating a whistling wind. The daggers collided with the blade, deflected and were flung aside. Embedded in the ground, not stopping, Viego leapt forward, his figure like a black arrow piercing the night. In his hand, the sharp knife gleamed coldly. He swung it straight down toward Gillian's head as if chopping the air. Gillian immediately stepped back, boots planted firmly on the ground, narrowly dodging the knife as it grazed his flesh. Viego missed, but was unshaken. He spun like a wild beast, twisting the knife midair. Gillian swung his heavy axe. The steel blade collided violently with the sharp knife, sparks flying in the night. Viego's eyes had now turned insane, blood red. The corners of his mouth twisted into a grim, perverse smile, a hint of twisted pleasure from a man immersed in slaughter. The more he fought, the more frenzied he became. His strikes launched continuously at hurricane speed, each swing of the knife heavy like thunder. In his mind roared an unquenchable thought. No matter how strong you are, that was years ago, when you were still the mercenary corps captain. But while you were busy tending to your daughter's illness, I became stronger through countless battles. With a wild shriek, Viego became a flickering shadow, his figure appearing and disappearing everywhere, attacking relentlessly from all sides, each appearance a sharp slash, suffocating the opponent. He suddenly lunged toward the throwing daggers embedded in the ground, grasping them in his hand, his eyes flashing with arrogant pride. "Now you are no match for me." In an instant, Viego's whole body spun. The 3 daggers whistled through the air in a spiral path, spinning so fast that they created twisting blue. And then the 3 blades pierced deeply into Gillian's arms. He did not dodge, only using his muscular strength to absorb the impact, blood splattering brightly in the night. At that moment, Viego, like a predatory beast, lowered his center of gravity and lunged toward Gillian's legs, intending to knock him down. However, it was not so easy. The massive axe slashed down to intercept the trajectory. Yet Viego was equally formidable. His whole body twisted and leapt into the air. In the pale, cold moonlight, his figure like a ghost diving down from behind Gillian. His blood-red eyes of murderous rage like a wild beast about to tear apart its prey, shouting loudly, "It's over." A sharp cracking sound echoed throughout the mountain pass. But it was not the sound of flesh being torn, rather the trembling of the knife, its steel blade ringing eerily, the blue glow of mana erupting, concentrated in Gillian's strong hands, gripping the deadly blade tightly. His eyes cold, his hoarse voice full of authority. "So you want to take revenge on me?" Viego was stunned as if he could not believe his eyes. He had wrapped mana around his arms, yet now he was not using his full power. This thought made him both furious and confused by what he once knew. Before he could think further, a streak of light from Gillian's axe flashed through the night. The slash so fast that the naked eye could not follow. Every muscle fiber in Gillian's arm tensed, mana erupting along the blade, forming a fierce streak of light. The power from that violent strike like a sweeping storm, not merely a slash, but absolute suppressive force. Viego was flung like a sandbag. His body slammed hard against the trunk of a nearby ancient tree, making the tree shake violently. Viego's breathing was rapid, his chest heaving violently, his hands trembling as he held his bloodied face, struggling to rise amid the bone-deep pain. Heavy footsteps sounded. Gillian slowly approached, his shadow looming over Viego's pitiful body. He gripped the man's knife in his hand, his voice low and enigmatic. "I really do not understand. If you intended revenge, there were plenty of opportunities." Gillian's voice growled, his gaze growing angrier. "So why did you not come to kill me sooner?" Viego suddenly let out a hoarse laugh. The twisted smile made his shoulders shake. "You do not know the whole story." His voice hoarse as if torn from his chest, he continued, each word heavy with resentment. "I came to your house." But the captain of the mercenary corps Ratatosker was not there. In Viego's mind appeared the image of Gillian slouched and sullen at that time. His anger boiling even more, he shouted, "And all I saw was a miserable old man, not worth taking a life." He lowered his head, the corners of his mouth curved bitterly, then looked up, his eyes briefly mixing sorrow and hatred. "Where has the Gillian I once idolized gone?" Hearing those words, Gillian's face remained expressionless, only letting out a cold snort. Immediately after, he casually tossed the knife onto the ground in front of Viego, like a final return. His strong hand slowly reached behind his back, grasping the familiar hilt. As the steel blade was drawn, as if awakened by those words, felt his blood boil. He roared, leapt up, grabbed the knife embedded in the ground. A surge of rage exploding, he lunged forward, his screams echoing through the mountains. Yes, now this is the true battle. Viego's knife slashed violently, the steel whistling through the air. Gillian immediately swung his blade to block, the two metals clashing, sparks flying, silver light dazzling in the darkness. Viego's face twisted in madness, his shouts reverberating throughout the mountain pass. This was the moment he had long awaited. The two figures spun around each other in brutal close combat, the metallic clangs echoing across the gorge. Viego, like a madman, continuously launching stabbing and slashing strikes at hurricane speed, his body twisting constantly, the blade in his hand flashing like lightning. Gillian remained unflinching, his strong arms swinging the axe in counterattack, each block, each parry executed with cold precision. They charged at each other, exchanging positions in a flash, left to right, front to back. Every kick and sweep scattering earth and stone. Viego roared, striking from side to side, determined to defeat through insane fury. But Gillian stood like an immovable mountain, repelling every attack, his eyes blazing with determination. In a fleeting moment, Viego slipped, and Gillian did not miss. The knife in his hand plunged deep into Viego's waist. Viego gritted his teeth to endure the pain, but could not stop the blood from gushing from his mouth. But he still swung the knife in desperate retaliation. Gillian leaned to dodge, then immediately twisted his hips, the massive axe coming down. his eyes blazing red like a war god incarnate. Viego froze, his whole body paralyzed, only able to lift his head to stare straight at his former leader, the man who had once been his idol. Gillian's voice thundered into his chest. I will remember you, captain of the 5th unit of the Mercenary Corps Ratatosker, Viego Valanos. Yet when facing death, he showed no fear, no despair, only a contented smile, accepting his fate. The axe struck down, blood spraying everywhere, staining the space in the mountain gorge red. Viego collapsed, his hands falling limp, the broken knife rolling beside him. Gillian stepped forward, bent down to pick up the knife, his gaze solemn. He stood motionless over the bloodied body, saying nothing, perhaps offering a final tribute to his former comrade. The familiar voice of Ghislaine rang out behind him. Well done, words that made Gillian immediately turn around. He and Belinda stepped quickly across the scattered corpses on the ground. Approaching him, she glanced around, then forced a cheerful remark. Hey, if we sold all the equipment here, we could make a fortune, right? Gillian bowed his head, his voice contemplative. I have delayed unnecessarily. I am very sorry. Ghislaine gently shook his head in reply. It's all right. Though his expression remained calm, his eyes as they looked at the swordsman in front of him shone with admiration. Gillian, he is even more extraordinary than I expected. Memories from a past life suddenly surged back. When he was a young mercenary just leaving his family, Ghislaine had heard stories about Gillian from his Fortunately, he had acted in time to gain such a reliable ally. Ghislaine looked up, slowly asking, Do you remember who that guy was? Gillian lifted the knife he had just picked up, his gaze quietly studying the blood-stained steel, then replied softly, Yes. He looked up at the cold moon hanging high above, his hand gripping the knife tightly, his voice hoarse as if whispering to the night. He was my former comrade. The 3 words former comrade from Gillian's mouth felt like a knife gently cutting through the heart, making Ghislaine momentarily stir. He lifted his head to the bright moon in the sky, a wave of longing rising in his chest, wondering what his former comrades were doing. Before meeting him, they must have been living their own lives. A moment of silence passed. The corners of Ghislaine's lips curved into a faint smile, his breath lightening, inwardly asking, But one day, we will all return, won't we? Shaking off the wave of emotions, Ghislaine let out a soft breath, his voice returning to its indifferent tone. All right, let's just collect the valuable items like Belinda said. Hearing this, she exclaimed with excitement, Great, now Mr. Gillian, lead the way so we can quickly gather the items. But in response to her cheerful words came only the cold voice of the towering swordsman. I am not your subordinate. Once the task was done, they set off again, 2 days passing peacefully as Ghislaine's carriage crossed the long mountain pass, heading straight for home. From the hillside, Belinda looked down at the distant territory, letting out a quiet sigh. Wonderful, almost there. Gillian glanced along, asking, Is that Perdium? Ghislaine cast his eyes into the distance, nodding slightly. Yes. He let his gaze sweep over the mist-covered trees, then settled on the distant mansion, a stirring feeling rising in his chest, truly fortunate to have a place to return to, always believing one could come back when leaving. Seeing Ghislaine deep in thought, Gillian seemed to sense he had something on his mind. Curiously, Ghislaine asked, Gillian, what do you think when looking over our territory? Taken aback by the question, the former mercenary looked slightly flustered. Yes, yes, very good. That reaction made Ghislaine pause, his words tinged with disappointment. Rubbish, huh? Gillian unconsciously shook his head, then nodded. Once again, Ghislaine turned his gaze over his territory and spoke honestly in a bitter tone. Those houses are so old they cannot be repaired, and do you see those fields? They are abandoned. All able-bodied people have been sent to the army and the land left fallow. Gillian sighed, then replied, I heard that Perdium constantly fights with the northern barbarians, but seeing it with my own eyes, the situation is even worse than I imagined. Hearing this, Belinda suddenly wondered, isn't this territory supposed to be very familiar to someone? Suddenly, Ghislaine's voice became firm and resolute. I will resolve all these issues, so I need your help. For you know well that this will be a long battle, to erase all that relates to Duke Delphine and fight to protect what is rightfully ours." Ghislaine looked over his homeland, silently vowing to restore this land, no matter the cost. The carriage entered the town, desolate and bleak, reflecting its shabby appearance. Suddenly, Belinda shouted in surprise, "Young master, Baird!" Ghislaine looked curiously, then froze, his eyes stirring, emotions surging. Ghislaine's eyes trembled slightly, waves of emotion rising within him as he gazed at the majestic mansion. At the gate, a familiar figure appeared, the lord of the Perdium territory, riding slowly on a gray horse, his face exuding coldness, yet deep in his eyes lingered an unmistakable, eager anticipation. The scene shifted to Castillo Perdium. Inside the grand hall of the mansion, the air was heated by the lively arguments of the high-ranking officials. "We need to reduce the military forces." "Reduce them further, sir?" "If we do that, the front lines may not hold. It would be better to request reinforcements from Rayfold." Homerun could only sigh heavily. The party reducing aid is Rayfold. Upon investigation, it seems they have gathered troops and stockpiled supplies there. Randolph, hearing this, exclaimed in shock, "What?" The discussions grew louder, worries and disagreements intertwining in every voice. There was no other choice. We must rebuild the garrison in the half-destroyed Demon Forest from the previous October battle. Even if it means reducing troop numbers, so as to temporarily relieve some of the pressure. But does the Lord not think that reducing forces entails significant risks? In that tense space, only Ghislaine sat quietly. A faint smile curved his lips, a warmth rising in his chest, everyone still the same as before. His gaze passed over each person. The imposing figure with a sword at his side was Randolph, captain of the Perdium Knights. Albert, the chief treasurer of Perdium, silently calculating, and the one who still bore the same perpetual worried expression was Homerun, the steward of Perdium. In an instant, memories from his past life surged back, making Ghislaine feel a deep pang. How long has it been? For a Grand Duke of Perdium, just a few months, but for the Mercenary King, decades. He inhaled deeply, then spoke resolutely, his tone full of respect. "On this campaign, you have worked hard." Ghislaine's eyes shone brightly as he looked directly at the man sitting calmly in the central position and spoke. "Father." Count Zwalter Perdium sat solemnly, his face impassive, his voice cold and deep as he asked, "What is it?" Father and son looked at each other in silence. Ghislaine suddenly recalled his childhood, how he had once resented his father for his rigidity and strictness. Yet now, looking deep into his eyes, Ghislaine felt a surge of indescribable compassion. He realized the exhaustion and burdens his father had silently carried all along, the heavy responsibilities of a lord, all pressing down like an invisible weight on those broad shoulders. To break the tension, Zwalter took a sip of tea and asked softly, "I heard you left the city for about a week. Where have you been?" Ghislaine did not hide anything. "I just returned from the Rayfold territory." Hearing this, he only sighed lightly and asked again, "No trouble this time, right?" Ghislaine lifted his teacup and replied calmly, "I did not cause any trouble." At that moment, Albert spoke up, "Your Highness, though it's hard to believe, I heard you won against Cain and earned a sum of money." His eyes swept over Ghislaine, scrutinizing. "You didn't go gambling, did you?" Ghislaine's lips curled slightly, thinking to himself, "Gambling? If at all, I would call it investment." Then he replied casually, "Not at all. I only had some matters to discuss with Amelia for a short time." At this point, the steward Homerun also spoke, his tone full of responsibility, but Ghislaine interrupted, waving his hand to cut him off. "Your Highness, I have always reminded you that before taking action, you must remember that you are the heir of Perdium." Ghislaine interrupted again, waving his hand. "I understand, do not worry." His casual, just as it seemed another argument was about to erupt, Zwalter spoke, cutting off everyone. "Everyone stop here." His words cast silence over the room. Then he looked up at Ghislaine and asked, "I heard that during my absence, it seems you have caused some trouble." Seeing Ghislaine momentarily blank, Zwalter continued, "I heard you personally dealt with Jamal and Philip. Those who attempted to betray Elena, is that correct? Hearing the two names, images of their detestable faces flashed in Ghislaine's mind, and his eyes briefly gleamed with anger. Those wretched bastards. Before Ghislaine could answer, Randolph spoke first, his tone dripping with disdain. There's no way you personally handled it. Surely they fought each other, and then your highness just intervened to finish it off. The rest is just rumor. Randolph's attitude made Ghislaine think carefully. Captain of the Perdium Knights, even if those men were traitors, having a knight under his command killed by me would not sit well with him. Perhaps I should subtly make him satisfied. Ghislaine then lowered his voice and replied, yes, more or less that is how it happened. Hearing this, Randolph no longer cared about anyone's attitude. A self-satisfied smile unavoidably spreading across his lips. Indeed, that is true. At this moment, just as it seemed there might be more reprimands, Count Zwalter unexpectedly spoke words of praise. Well done, and Ghislaine was startled. Although his face remained cold, there was a hint of satisfaction in his words. No matter the process, the important thing is that Elena is still alive, isn't that right? Ghislaine pondered for a moment, a strange joy stirring in his heart. This was the first time he had received even a small compliment from his father, warming him in a way he could hardly describe. After a moment of silence, he took a deep breath and resolutely spoke. Father, may I ask you a favor? Zwalter furrowed his brows slightly and replied, go ahead. Before Ghislaine could continue, Homerun quickly interjected, his seriousness apparent. Your Highness, if this time you intend to request a maintenance fee for this matter, I must say in advance, it is not allowed. Randolph also chimed in, pretending to scold. Of course, Your Highness has already done so many things. The complaints of the two made the atmosphere tense. Suddenly, Zwalter stood up, stepped in front of Ghislaine, and shouted, using military supplies to gamble, then in a bad mood burn the city gate, even kill war horses to roast the meat. And you even said that to forge the legendary sword, you melted all the knight's armor. Ghislaine simply pressed his lips together, unwilling to argue, thinking silently, oh, that is far too much. Back in his quarters, after recounting everything, he smugly said to his people, it's not that I am asking for permission, it's just a matter of courtesy. Anyway, this is something that must be done. Belinda's eyes glimmered with anxiety. Why are you so obsessed with it? Ghislaine merely shrugged, his tone indifferent. That, I will tell you later. In his mind, he already had a secret plan. If revealed now and rumors spread, it would be very troublesome. As long as not far from the entrance to the Beast Forest, amid layers of darkness and lurking danger, there existed a terrifying secret. Buried deep underground was a massive rune stone quarry, a mineral containing limitless primal magic. Rune stone was extremely rare, driving mages to madness, for it could be used to craft magical tools, barriers, summoning circles, or even ancient spell scrolls. It was also the foundation of alchemy and magical research, opening possibilities far beyond ordinary understanding. Therefore, the Beast Forest was both a land of death and an invaluable treasure, because of alchemy, magical research, and many other fields. There was no place where magic was unused. In his previous life, it was the Delphine ducal family that discovered the massive runestone quarry, and thanks to it, their power expanded, remaining unshaken for decades. However, in this life, no one but Ghislaine knew this secret. This time, he would fully exploit this advantage, turning the treasure in the Beast Forest into a stepping stone for his own path. This was not just an opportunity, but the key to changing the fate of Perdium itself. Faced with Ghislaine's cold and indifferent attitude, Belinda unexpectedly felt her heart sink, her face fell, and her lips pressed tightly as if holding back frustration. She sighed, lowered her head, and softly said, yes, surely the young master has already made plans. Gillian, standing beside them, showed no emotion, only nodding. I will comply. Ghislaine smiled in satisfaction and quickly moved on to preparations. Very well, Belinda, go to the trade guild in the nearby territory and hire me a group of mercenaries, around 200 people. She was momentarily startled, anxiety flickering across her face. That is a sum earned at great risk. Yet you have no intention of saving even a little. Before she could finish, Gillian intervened, his expression serious. Do you think this is all right, young master? Mercenaries are rude and reckless, and if assembled in such numbers, controlling them will be difficult. They could even turn on their employer, which is predictable. Ghislaine nodded, his voice cold as steel. Exactly. Therefore you and I will personally find those worth employing, if they are truly useful. Just as he was about to leave the room, Ghislaine suddenly turned his head, his tone casual but laden with implication. Among the small mercenary groups in the north, there is one group with very good skills. Hearing this, Gillian immediately understood, his eyes flickering with a mix of surprise and dissent. No way, those mad dogs. Images of cunning wolves flashed in his mind, making him grit his teeth. They may have good skills, but if they make a mistake, they are rabid dogs that will bite anyone, even their master. Ghislaine smirked, a gleam of barely concealed excitement in his eyes. Exactly. It is them, the Cerberus mercenaries. The atmosphere instantly grew heavy, as if the very name alone evoked the scent of blood and violence. The scene shifted to the next day. The following day, riding on horseback, Ghislaine casually spoke a short but loaded sentence. Let's go and leash those mad dogs. The scene shifted to lands beyond Zimbar territory, where the Cerberus mercenaries' camp was located. The atmosphere there was chaotic and noisy, with people standing and sitting, utterly undisciplined. Outside, a soldier watched with interest, pressing his binoculars to his eyes and sneering. Hey, they're coming. The one lying next to him curled his lip in contempt. Pathetic. Do you even know where this is to come here on your own? The one holding the binoculars gleefully continued observing, lowering his voice. Judging by the look, it seems like some young noble brat. If we play this right, we might catch a fine prey. Before he could celebrate, a massive hand shot out, covering the binoculars completely. Before he could react, a horrific scream echoed throughout the camp, forcing the noisy mercenaries inside to all turn their heads. They froze as they saw Gillian, towering like a tower, using one hand to grab the observer's face, lifting him off the ground like a chicken. He screamed violently, "You bastard, what are you doing? Let me go." But the commotion only made Gillian more irritated. His huge hand squeezed tighter, twisting the man's face in pain. A moment later, Gillian flung him hard, sending the unlucky man flying through the gathered mercenaries and smashing headfirst into the base of a large tree. He collapsed on the spot, unconscious. Gillian's act of throwing the man was like an open provocation, a slap directly across the face of the Cerberus gang. The noisy atmosphere instantly turned oppressive, each mercenary's eyes burning red with rage. Shouts rang out everywhere. Dozens, then hundreds, drew their weapons simultaneously, the clang of metal mixing with growls like a pack of mad wolves. Who is that? Get ready to fight. Are you out of your mind? Amid the surging anger, a figure suddenly stepped forward from the crowd, speaking loudly. He appeared to be a high-ranking noble, but even a noble couldn't act so recklessly. In his hands he held an array of sharp weapons, clearly a person of influence in the gang, and with a smug tone, he looked straight at Ghislaine, curling his lips in a cold smile. Don't even think of leaving here alive. The hunting dogs beside him immediately joined in, laughing arrogantly as if victory was assured. Ghislaine didn't respond, simply riding calmly atop his white horse, each step deliberate. His cold eyes swept over the mercenaries like he was looking at insects. Then his voice rang out, deep and commanding. Silence. Who is the leader of you here? After hearing Ghislaine's question, Ronan exhaled sharply and laughed out loud. He spun the spiked flail in his hands, glanced at Ghislaine, and said, "Looks like there's a crazy noble here." Ronan swung the flail, preparing to attack, and shouted, "If you want to cause trouble, you better be ready to face the consequences." With that, the spiked head shot straight forward with considerable speed and force. In an instant, it flew right toward Ghislaine, yet he remained calmly seated on his horse, completely unfazed. Just before the spiked flail could hit him, a strike came from below, piercing the chain links and forcing the flail to change direction and slacken. Gillian appeared, using his sword to thrust upward and block the attack. Witnessing this, the mercenaries stared in bewilderment. Ronan tried to pull back, thinking to himself, he must have jabbed the sword between the chain links. Immediately after, the flail head dropped with a thud at the feet of Ghislaine's horse. Ghislaine immediately spoke. As expected, they won't listen to me. Then, in a cold tone, he commanded Gillian, just take it easy, don't kill them. Gillian gripped the chain in his hand and replied, understood. With that, he swung the chain toward himself. As it was pulled, the other end tied to Ronan dragged him along, forcing him to scream, you bastard. Gillian spun around, swinging the chain forward, lifting Ronan's entire body into the air. With his other hand, he pulled the flail head across his own neck. Then it slammed directly into Ronan's midsection while he was still suspended, causing him to scream in pain. The mercenaries behind rushed forward, shouting, you bastard! Do you think just because you're a noble will stand still? Before the lackeys could reach him, Gillian swung his sword with force, dragging Ronan along. He then flung him hard into his own followers, pushing them back instantly. One move from him took down 4 or 5 men at once, leaving the rest too intimidated to make a sound. Gillian exuded a fierce aura, his sharp gaze sweeping over them. The remaining mercenaries stood frozen, trembling in fear before the old man's strength. At this moment, Ghislaine had dismounted from his horse. He stepped forward and asked, about time, how long do you expect me to wait? Ghislaine furrowed his brow, seriously commanding, cleared the other soldiers aside and called their leaders out here. At the same time, a voice rang out in response, disturbing us while we sleep. Upon hearing the voice, the mercenaries immediately snapped to attention. The opposite side did the same, forming 2 lines facing each other. As he stepped forward, the man spoke to introduce himself. I am Kaor, commander of the Cerberus mercenary squad. The young man with red hair and a fairly handsome face countered, why have you come looking for me? Kaor, standing between 2 rows of his subordinates, flexed his muscles beneath his shirt. Ghislaine responded, when someone comes to the mercenary squad, there is always a purpose. Of course I have come to make a request. Kaor replied with another question. A request? What kind of person comes with a request and makes my men end up like this? His tone was serious, almost scolding. A noble should know proper manners. Ghislaine did not hesitate to answer. Considering this my way of greeting, I believe the best way is to make you submit. Kaor exhaled and then smiled. Submit? You mean if I greet you twice, it means you want to start a fight, right? The scene then shifted inside a tent, where the 2 leaders sat facing each other. Kaor spoke first. Fine then, make your request. What exactly is this great request of yours? Ghislaine immediately answered, the monster forest. The name made the armored subordinates flinch slightly, and even Kaor showed a hint of unease. Ghislaine continued to explain his request. I want to hire you to conquer the monster forest. The subordinates murmured among themselves, the monster forest, the forest full of monsters. Do not tell me it is the forest bordering the Perdium territory. Kaor chuckled lightly and asked seriously, who are you to dare touch that dangerous forest? Ghislaine introduced himself directly. I am Ghislaine Perdium, Duke of the Perdium territory. His answer brought a brief silence over the room. Then the Cerberus subordinates laughed and intervened. Hey young man, do not be reckless. The monster forest is no joke. Anyone who enters there will lose their life. Kaor added, Kid, it seems you are just a pampered noble with no real understanding. With a wave of his hand as a command, he concluded, enough talk. The negotiation has failed. The subordinates shuffled and raised their weapons. Before Ghislaine could say anything, Gillian stood ready with his axe to protect his master. Ghislaine's voice rang out with a challenge. Are you scared? This made Kaor frown, his body trembling slightly. Ghislaine sighed and continued to taunt. I heard your mercenary squad has skill. Could it be just rumors? Immediately, Kaor propped his feet on the table, regained his composure, and replied, do not be arrogant. Kid, as you said, we are mercenaries. If the price does not suit us, we simply will not take the job, that is all. Ghislaine continued to sneer, the weak always making excuses. It seemed he had successfully angered Kaor, who pressed his lips silently for a moment. Then he replied, "You have ruined my mood. I was planning to have some fun with you. Yet now you use that amateurish provocation. A brat like you who does not understand how the world works is not even worth striking. I will let you go, compensate for the damages and disappear." Ghislaine closed his eyes, his voice dropping. "It is not like that." Then he looked at him, speaking seriously. "Kaor, commander of the Cerberus mercenary squad, I challenge you to a duel with the recognition of Mori." Ghislaine's words froze the mercenary subordinates. Even a calm man like Gillian was startled and amazed. Kaor frowned at him and asked, "Do you know what that means?" Ghislaine smiled, confidently answering, "Of course I know. A traditional one-on-one duel of mercenaries, with the recognition of Moriana. Once the duel is accepted, the two participants fight with short swords, cannot use magic, and their hands are tied together. Leaving the small circle enclosing the duel is considered a loss. It is a brutal survival fight within a confined space and limited movement. There have been many cases where both the winner and the loser die." Ghislaine continued, "The loser must acknowledge defeat and absolutely obey the winner's orders, meaning the loser becomes the winner's dog." After explaining, he looked at him and asked, "What do you think?" Gillian glanced at Ghislaine, thinking, a noble duke using the dirty rules of mercenaries. In the mercenary world, refusing this challenge is tantamount to admitting oneself a loser, so he has no way to decline this proposal. After hearing this, Kaor suddenly laughed. The entire tent camp now erupted again with the laughter of him and his subordinates. Kaor laughed coldly, frowning, his eyes flashing a deadly red. His voice deep, "Comrades, it seems our noble aristocrat here wants to receive recognition in the mercenary style. Then we should gladly comply, shouldn't we?" Immediately after, the hands of the two were tied together with a rope. Ghislaine and Kaor stood in a small circle, surrounded by cheering subordinates, each holding a short sword in preparation for the duel. While Gillian focused on observing, the mercenary subordinates behind shouted excitedly, "The arrogant noble will face the consequences. Commander, kill him." Inside the survival circle, Kaor remembered, "It seems you have some hidden tricks and think you can face me without fear. But now, even if you want, you cannot withdraw." Finishing his words, he suddenly pulled Ghislaine strongly toward himself, leaving him no time to react. Then Kaor whispered into Ghislaine's ear proudly, "I have participated in duels like this 5 times and have never been defeated." After speaking, he pushed him away and smiled smugly as his subordinates cheered behind. Ghislaine's voice rang out 5 times, then he also pulled Kaor strongly toward himself. At the same time, looking down, he replied to him, "I have done it hundreds of times, do you know?" After finishing speaking, Ghislaine frowned, glanced at his opponent. Opposite Kaor also showed his determination. He tensed with an angry face. Then both instantly thrust their weapons toward each other. Killing moves were launched, but very quickly both tilted their heads to one side to dodge. In an instant Ghislaine glanced quickly to the right. Kaor likewise furrowed his brow looking at him, both hands still tied together preventing either from stepping back. They simultaneously swung their arms in a horizontal slash. Then a series of attacks and defensive swings came from both sides. Kaor seized the moment to pull Ghislaine toward him, his hand holding the short sword drawing back. As Kaor launched stabs, Ghislaine timely twisted his body and brought his short sword behind his back to block. He quickly changed his attack. A horizontal slash aimed at the head was executed, and he hurriedly bent down to dodge. Just as Ghislaine escaped danger, he glanced over and was startled to see Kaor lift his leg to kick. Ghislaine hastily raised his own leg to block the kick. Kaor's kick was quite strong, making Ghislaine's shin go numb. Ghislaine looked down speechless. Kaor looked at him coldly with a hint of praise. Persistent indeed. "You say you have tried what others do once in a lifetime 100 times. Kaor thrust his sword toward Ghislaine, then shouted, "If you want to boast, then speak a bit more sensibly." Ghislaine bent his head in time to avoid danger. While the two were fiercely fighting in the small circle, the subordinates continuously cheered. That noble has now been subdued by the captain's strength. Finish him. This is the price for daring to insult us. Hearing this, Gillian turned and glared at them with the eyes of an assassin. Immediately the subordinates fell silent and trembled. Then he turned back to focus on the duel and thought to himself that this was an unfavorable fight. The two stood in a small circle, the ring so narrow that even one person lying down would barely fit, under the rule that only pure physical strength could be used without magic. The disparity in body size was obvious, and with hands bound their movement was restricted. Watching Ghislaine raise his arms to continuously defend, Gillian judged silently that the young master could only reluctantly dodge or block. He assessed from experience that with a larger body than the leader, Kaor could easily seize and control the situation. Gillian was ready for the worst case. If the young master fell into danger, his hand was ready to take the axe from his back to rescue Ghislaine. At this moment the battle was still evenly matched. Ghislaine was at a slight disadvantage as Kaor twisted his arm. The instant he launched a slash, Ghislaine managed to jump up and flip to the opposite side. Immediately after, Ghislaine landed, his supporting leg faltering. Looking down, it seemed the pain was right at his shin where he had blocked the earlier kick. Ghislaine looked at his shoulder and thought that the arm that had just blocked the previous strike hurt a lot. Indeed, without magical protection, even though he had blocked the later stab, the aftershocks still accumulated. Kaor laughed loudly in satisfaction. Look, the man's face has gone pale. He may not hold out much longer. He continued to attack, thinking inwardly, Ghislaine Perdium, watching you struggle against my strength is pitiful. Compared to the nobles I have met, you are tough, but only up to a point. Kaor sneered with confident eyes. I have seen through your intention. He assessed the situation with every strike. Whenever Kaor swung his dagger, I would easily parry or dodge. For the lighter thrusts from Kaor, Ghislaine chose to endure them with his body. However, in this battle, according to Moriana's rules, all magical support was completely eliminated, and even if he could block, the aftershocks continued to accumulate on his body. Surely by now, Ghislaine could also clearly feel the pressure weighing down on his legs, his expression giving everything away. Kaor continued to smile smugly, struggling more. That's what makes it interesting. He believed he had completely read the young master in front of him. Immediately after, Kaor spun the dagger in his hand and prepared to strike. He launched a left-hand thrust, which Ghislaine quickly blocked. Kaor then raised his weapon high, taking advantage of his size to strike downward with extreme force. Ghislaine hurriedly lifted his hands to block, his other two hands still bound together. After hooking Ghislaine's arm, Kaor pulled him closer, forcing him to bend forward. Seizing the opportunity, he delivered a knee strike. Just before the knee struck Ghislaine, his eyes flashed. Ghislaine quickly lifted his leg to block it. Enduring the repeated impacts, the aftershocks caused sharp pain in his leg. Seeing this, Kaor confidently declared, "Enough, this is the end." He gripped his weapon tightly, raised it high, and stabbed straight down. Seeing the dagger aimed at Ghislaine's back, Kaor shouted, "Die!" The mercenary crew's subordinates gasped in admiration. Meanwhile, Gillian had taken out his axe, ready to intervene and rescue, silently thinking, "Young master, be careful." Suddenly, at the most dangerous moment, Ghislaine revealed a mysterious smile. Instead of resisting head-on, he chose to twist his body and press against Kaor. Ghislaine let his body fall freely to the ground, causing Kaor's strike to miss. Kaor was extremely shocked, wondering how he could dodge his dagger in that position. Continuing to use Kaor's body for leverage, Ghislaine treated him as a pillar, swung himself and slid across the circle. At the same time, he swung his dagger in a slash, and blood spurted from Kaor's side. Kaor looked down at his wound in utter astonishment. The mercenary subordinates were also stunned, not daring to make a sound. Gillian's expression mirrored theirs, his eyes wide in surprise. Of course, a single slash could not make him falter. Kaor launched a diagonal thrust, and Ghislaine calmly ducked to avoid it. With another skillful spin, Ghislaine brought his weapon downwards. Then, he delivered an upward slash, leaving a cut across Kaor's chest. The crowd gasped in astonishment. The captain had been slashed again. They raised their fists in admiration. That noble, he was clearly overwhelmed by the captain's strength just moments ago. Captain, show him your true power. Continuously struck and encouraged by the subordinate's words, Kaor swung his arm to slash across Ghislaine's head, but he simply ducked with ease. Sensing an opening, Ghislaine leapt forward and rammed his shoulder hard into Kaor's face. He glanced at him, dagger in hand ready to strike. Instead of a stab, Ghislaine punched Kaor repeatedly at Kaor's face and chest. He twisted the dagger in his hand, directing the tip downward. Then, he thrust directly into Kaor's arm, which was still bound. Despite the pain, Kaor shouted curses, bastard, and continued stabbing at him, but Ghislaine evaded completely. His agility now took Kaor by surprise and angered him. His teeth clenched. Looking at the young noble before him, Kaor was puzzled. You, who barely managed to withstand my strength earlier, now what trick are you planning? With the experience of a seasoned warrior, after observing everything, Gillian finally realized the situation. By exerting brute force, the leader's muscles tensed. His body became less flexible, trying to dominate by overexertion, ultimately losing the necessary suppleness. Ghislaine did not confront his overwhelming power directly, instead choosing to relax, cleverly turning the flow of force into his own advantage. Gillian put away his axe and silently assessed. Unexpectedly, the young master could overcome the disadvantage of size in this way. Seeing Kaor at a disadvantage, the subordinates shouted impatiently, "Hey, Captain, what are you waiting for? At this rate, it's no fun anymore." Ghislaine looked at him and said, "Truly strong-willed. But in the past, there were always those pushed to the edge who broke the rules and resorted to magic." Kaor exhaled sharply, sweat beading on his face but still responding firmly. "You speak as if you've truly experienced 100 times that captain rank. You only obtained it through Moriana's recognition. If you dare break the rules, there will be no place for you to survive here." Ghislaine smiled and replied, "Truly admirable." He continued, "I admit, in a direct confrontation, I was slightly at a disadvantage." Kaor smiled cunningly and shouted, "But the conditions for determining victory are not just one." With both hands still bound together, he twisted his body, using all his strength to try to lift Ghislaine's body off the ground. Another rule in Moriana's recognition is like this: just one step outside the fighting circle, and you are considered defeated. At this moment, Ghislaine had been lifted by Kaor, with a high chance of being thrown out of the circle. He thought, no matter how talented you are, once I hurl your entire body like this, sooner or later you will touch the ground outside the circle. Then Kaor smiled with satisfaction. "Victory belongs to me." Ghislaine at this moment gripped his dagger tightly. Then he crossed his arms with Kaor's bound arms, continuing to use Kaor's body as a pillar. Instead of letting his feet touch the ground, Ghislaine kicked both legs into his thighs. Their hands were still tightly bound together, each gripping the other's wrist. Ghislaine pulled him close, dagger hand moving behind his back. He skillfully looped Kaor's arm around to lock his neck, while he jumped inside. Then Kaor's head was pressed forcefully to the ground by Ghislaine, the other hand ready with the sharp weapon. Before everyone's eyes, his body ended up outside the fighting circle, and the crowd went silent for a moment. The subordinates shouted in commotion, "He's out, outside the circle." Kaor lay there wondering, "So, is it really over?" Ghislaine stood calmly and declared, "Victory belongs to me." "Kaor." He turned and shouted, "You, what kind of person possesses such extraordinary power?" Ghislaine narrowed his eyes and replied, "Your attitude is completely inappropriate, in front of the one who will become your master. How dare you behave like that?" Finishing his words, Ghislaine pulled Kaor back up to his feet before everyone's confused gaze. He himself exhaled in curiosity. "What? The match is already over?" Ghislaine responded, "No, I haven't even stepped out of the circle yet." His words made Kaor gasp in realization. "What? Ghislaine raised his fist and continued, "From now on, it is time to teach you as one of my subordinates." After finishing his words, Ghislaine unleashed an extremely powerful punch straight to Kaor's face. He was knocked backwards onto the ground, leaving the surrounding mercenaries stunned and bewildered. Kaor quickly raised his hands in front of him and shouted to stop. "Hey, wait, according to the rules, stepping out of the circle is against the regulations." Before he could say anything more, another punch landed, contorting his face and causing blood to spurt out. Ghislaine retracted his hand and said, "You intend to bring rules into the battlefield to fight, huh?" Kaor continued to shout, "That guy, you still dare claim to be of noble blood?" Ghislaine kept his fist raised, glaring at him. "Do not protest against what your master decides." Kaor still tried to yell, "You madman," but before he could finish, his face collided with Ghislaine's fist again. Then a nightmare unfolded for him, as Ghislaine continuously struck him with a flurry of punches, the number of hits this time equaling the total of all the blows he had ever received in his life until now. The subordinates looked at Ghislaine's bloodied fist and anxiously whispered to each other, "Hey, is it really okay to leave it like this? The bet is already over." Kaor, his face swollen, tried to shout, "Stop it." The ground was now covered in blood as Ghislaine dragged him to stand in front of himself. He looked at Kaor and reminded him, "I still haven't stepped out of the circle yet." Ghislaine's words made him gasp, his already distorted face now filled with even greater fear. Kaor turned and shouted to his mercenary subordinates, "Are you just going to stand there? Kill this guy for me." They replied in unison, "Yes, sir," then tightened their grip on their weapons. Just as they charged forward, Gillian stepped in, his axe blocking the way. He radiated lethal intent, declaring coldly, "From now on, anyone who dares to interfere with the young master will die." The entire mercenary squad froze, their bodies trembling before Gillian's aura. Kaor stood there with his swollen face, eyes wide and blinking as he froze at the current situation. He began to show fear, his lips trembling, unable to speak further. As he turned, he saw Ghislaine's face right in front of him, along with the question, "Shall we finish our business then?" He looked at Ghislaine's fist coming at him and could only give a helpless, wry smile. The extremely powerful punch sent Kaor flying backward. He was in pain, yet inwardly still disparaged. Nobles, after all, are nothing but a bunch of cowards. Unflattering images of the nobility flashed through his mind. First, the arrogant pigs. Next came the treacherous ministers with their deceitful faces, and also those narcissists who always thought they were the best, the center of the universe. But in the past, Kaor had stood before them, and just a little intimidation would make them immediately cower and beg. And he would take all their money, which was truly an unparalleled pleasure. In the past, Kaor, who had arrogantly built his reputation with the infamous nickname of the Mad Dog, now wondered to himself why he had to endure humiliation before such a young noble. The crowd watched their leader collapse and shouted, "Captain Kaor, isn't he going to die? But what should we do?" Ghislaine lifted him up, glanced briefly, then assessed, "This should be enough." He then pointed to the subordinates outside. "What are you waiting for? Bring water, bandages, and clothes here." They were astonished and asked in unison, "What?" He lifted him up and asked, "Do you intend to let your captain die like this?" Only then did they realize Ghislaine's meaning. In the territory of the Cerberus Mercenary Corps, the subordinates hurriedly responded, "Yes, understood." Gillian tilted his head toward his master, silent. He frowned and thought, "These unruly mercenaries actually obey the young master." They busily went about their tasks, gathering the necessary items under Ghislaine's orders to take care of Kaor. In the world of mercenaries, where fists are stronger than rules, young Master Ghislaine had engraved into their minds in the most direct and effective way who truly stands at the top, who is the alpha wolf. And because of that, they showed obedience and fear. Scene change, some time later, after Kaor had received medical attention, with his body covered in wounds and bandages, a piece of paper was placed on the table. Ghislaine looked straight at him, pointed at the paper, and demanded, "Sign it, the ink and quill are ready." He glanced over with eyes that could barely see normally, momentarily unable to speak. Then Kaor took the pen and quickly signed the paper with a click of his tongue. Finished, he pushed the paper back to Ghislaine and said flatly, "Here." This displeased Ghislaine, who frowned and asked again, "Here." Immediately, Kaor avoided his gaze and became obedient, hoping for his consideration. Ghislaine praised him, then suddenly grabbed his wrist, causing Kaor to become uneasy. But Ghislaine spoke gently, "From now on, we are of the same household." A few days later, on the outskirts of the Perdium territory, a group of soldiers had gathered here with weapons and shields. One man in the group complained, "Oh God, why summon us so early this morning?" Another replied, "I have to finish lunch before I can start working." The bald guy stepped forward and added, "Have you heard? There is a rumor that the one hiring us is young Master Perdium." The two standing there were astonished. "What? Really a childish brat? I wonder if he can manage a band of mercenaries." They discussed among themselves that a quick and sloppy job would still yield good profit. Meanwhile, the one with the blind eye stood silent. Suddenly a clap rang out along with a loud voice calling everyone's attention. "All right, listen up." The muscular young man stepped forward and declared, "To easily handle a naive owner, you need a big representative." "Right." Some recognized him. "You are Gordon the Muscle." He thumped his chest, introducing himself. "Yes, I am Gordon the Muscle. Today I'm impressed. However, if we are not united, it will be hard to achieve the desired result." Some agreed, thinking back. Last time, some idiot made outrageous demands and everything fell apart. The bald man stepped up and asked, "So what will we do this time?" Gorgon sneered in reply, "Things like this need restraint. Overdoing it will only ruin it." He took out a bag of gold and continued, "I will act as the representative to pressure the boss. So the pay you can split among yourselves reasonably, okay?" Seeing the coins, they agreed, "Fine. If Gordon takes the bait, things will surely go smoothly. That big clumsy body is really useful now, very reassuring. Gordon, always training, but with a keen nose for money." At the same time, someone in the distance shouted to attract everyone's attention, "Hey, someone is coming." In the distance, a familiar figure rode on a white horse toward them. The clop of hooves slow and steady. On the horse was none other than Ghislaine. They squinted and wondered. "What is this?" He came alone. Judging by his clothes, he seems to be the big boss. Pathetic. I wonder if he'll run away when he sees Gordon's muscles. Gordon waved to order the group. "Come on, everyone step forward. Keep some momentum." He rubbed his hands excitedly. Must let that naive noble brat taste life a little. Unconsciously, Gorgon froze, letting out a startled sound, frowning as he looked ahead. Ghislaine was not alone. Behind him was an entire army. On his right was Gillian, on his left Kaor and Ronan, and behind them all the members of the Cerberus mercenary team. One worried man pointed and asked, "That dog-headed helmet, could it be the Cerberus mercenaries?" Gorgon was startled and exclaimed, "What?" Their gazes turned toward Kaor in confusion, wondering, how could this be? What happened that made those notoriously stubborn mercenaries obedient to their master? While the group was still in shock, Ghislaine and his army advanced forward. He turned his face, glancing sharply downward. Then Ghislaine asked Gordon, "Are you the commander here?" He avoided Ghislaine's gaze and stammered, "Why, yes, that's right." Ghislaine calmly continued, "What is your name?" At that moment, he looked up and introduced himself. "I am Gordon the Muscle." Hearing the name, Ghislaine repeated, "Gordon the Muscle. Huh." He lightly punched him in the chest and commented, "Impressive," an action that made him tremble unconsciously. Before everyone's eyes, Ghislaine introduced himself. "I am the eldest noble of Perdium, Ghislaine Perdium." He spurred his horse forward and commanded, "Summon all your mercenaries, Gordon." Ghislaine glanced back and declared, "From now on, we will explore the monster forest."